In the fall of 1995, a serial killer was on the loose. Crossing the country, he lured women with his charm and then struck. Each time, he vanished before police could catch him. The FBI and police detectives needed to stop him before another victim met this deadly stranger.
The body of a young woman found burned in a truck launched a manhunt to find her killer. When more bodies began to turn up across the country, the FBI believed the cases were linked. Investigators had a suspect. They just couldn't find him. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would enlist the help of local law enforcement and even long-haul truckers to stop a cross-country killer.
In the early morning hours of September 29, 1995, the Los Angeles Fire Department responded to a vehicle fire at a hospital in Van Nuys. They found a pickup truck burning in the parking lot. When the flames were extinguished, they found human remains. Firemen contacted the Arson and Homicide Division of the Los Angeles Police Department. Homicide detectives responded to the scene and were briefed by uniformed officers already there. They questioned a witness, a nurse who had seen the fire start. She said she had arrived for work before dawn for the early morning shift. In the parking lot, she saw the truck go ablaze. She saw the outline of a figure with long hair run from the truck as the flames erupted. She never saw a face. And she had never seen the truck before. Investigators inspected the vehicle. The pattern of fire damage indicated it had begun in the cab and had burned very quickly. Investigators believed it had been intentionally set. An accelerant had been used, probably gasoline. The body inside appeared to be a female, but it was burned beyond recognition. Some items survived the fire, including a backpack, a camera, and a roll of undeveloped film. Technicians recovered several documents that bore the name Sandra Gallagher. By sunrise, detectives at LAPD's Van Nuys station had run the truck's plates.
Okay, I'll call back.
Through DMV records, Detective Mike Koblenz was able to confirm that Sandra Gallagher owned the truck.
We'd done some work at the office and learned that she was in fact married to an individual, Steve, who lived in the Los Angeles area. We attempted to contact him and made arrangements to interview him at Van Nuys Station.
Detectives suspected it was Sandra in the truck, but identification through dental records would take a few days.
Thank you. I have some things I'd like you to look at. See if you can tell me if they recognize.
Since the body was too damaged to identify, detectives asked Stephen Gallagher to look through the recovered evidence. He said the backpack, camera, and other items were Sandra's.
We have these
The police department had developed a roll of film which survived the fire.
Wife and somebody.
Stephen identified his wife in the pictures. Most married homicide victims are killed by their husbands.
Well, we were having a few problems. But
Detectives asked Stephen about his relationship with Sandra.
There's a lot of domestic violence, spousal abuse that goes on, so it's just a direction to go to initially. In our case, as it related to Sandra Gallagher, once again, we wanted to eliminate the husband as a suspect and determine a little bit more about our victim, Sandra.
Stephen said he had seen his wife on September 28th, the day before the truck fire.
Exciting's been happening. What about you?
60 hours.
That day, the couple had met for lunch.
My brother may be getting a promotion. He's going to get
He
a
and
raise.
Sandra were experiencing marital problems, and they'd spent the last couple of nights apart.
He should know, I would say, week after next.
They had talked about reconciling,
Who's that guy I saw at the bar with the other night? The big guy in the leather jacket?
but things were still strained between them.
It's none of your business, okay?
What was your relationship?
Stephen told detectives he last saw Sandra around 2 p.m., though he heard from his wife later that evening.
We split apart for a bit. Still trying to work.
He said Sandra called him from a local bar called McRed's.
I know.
She was very excited and told him she had won $1,200 in the lottery.
I was over my brother's.
Since that call, Stephen hadn't heard from his wife and had no idea where she had gone.
There were a few other people.
Detectives had to corroborate his story.
Once he mentioned the bar McRed's, that was our direction. We wanted to get in there, find out who was the bartender, who the owner was, who was there that particular evening, and who could identify some photos of Sandra that we'd gathered from the truck.
LAPD detectives visited the bar. When shown a photo of Sandra Gallagher, the bartender recognized the woman.
Okay. What can you tell me about her?
She knew her by her nickname,
She
Sam.
had a lottery ticket. Hey. Guess what?
The bartender confirmed that Sandra had been in the bar on the night of the 28th. She had told everyone about her lottery win.
Yeah.
Some customers overheard the detectives' questions and said they had also been in McRed's that
Can
evening.
you tell me about her when she was in here the other night?
They also remembered Sandra and recalled one man who talked with her that night.
These people in the bar had mentioned to us that they recognized the photographs, and they identified the photographs as a female by the name of Sam. This is the name that they knew her by, was Sam. And everybody had mentioned she was with a person by the name of Glen.
Yeah.
They described Glen as having long blonde hair and a beard. He'd been coming in regularly for the past few days. That night, he seemed interested in Sandra and talked to her for quite a while.
Okay.
Glen was friendly and came across as a big spender, buying drinks for Sandra and the others.
Yeah.
When the bar closed, Glen had asked Sandra for a ride home.
That's the big hint. I think we gotta get out of here.
He said he lived nearby. She agreed to drop him off, and they left together. The customers hadn't seen Glen since that night.
Yeah, she took him home.
Do you know where he lives?
It was about 5 minutes.
They believed Glen's last name was Rogers, but they weren't sure.
Or what time did he leave?
Their description of him matched the one of the man seen fleeing the burning truck.
If you think of anything else, please call me.
Detective Koblenz would check the
Thank you
lead.
for your help. Thank you.
Through department sources, we're able to identify Glen Rogers as a resident in the Van Nuys area. And we're able to obtain photographs of Mr. Rogers. These photographs, in the next day or two, were shown to various witnesses at the bar in the form of a photo lineup, and Mr. Rogers was identified in this photo lineup as the person being at McRed's with Sandra Gallagher.
Detectives secured a search warrant for Rogers' apartment. It was only a few minutes away from where the truck had been burned.
LAPD, search warrant!
They didn't know if Rogers was inside, perhaps with a weapon. Uniformed officers entered first to clear the apartment.
Talk with him.
Rogers wasn't there.
Come on, check out.
It looked like Rogers had cleared out in a hurry. Detectives recovered a purse and a woman's wallet. It was empty of cash and held no ID.
No identification.
They also found a woman's earring.
The earring became significant in that her husband, Steve Gallagher, identified that earring as one that he had purchased as a pair for his wife a couple months earlier.
After several days, the coroner made his report. He positively identified the remains from the truck as those of Sandra Gallagher. He determined that she had not burned to death.
We learn in the nose area of our victim there wasn't any presence of evidence of fire, sooting, and so on. That gave us information that because she didn't breathe any of the fire, any of the soot, it gave us an indication that she had died prior to the fire itself.
The mother of three had been killed by manual strangulation. Los Angeles detectives charged Glen Rogers with Sandra Gallagher's murder and issued a warrant for his arrest. They entered Rogers' name and description into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, a database that links over 57,000 law enforcement agencies nationwide.
That informs other agencies around the United States that Glen Rogers, in this case, is in fact wanted in Los Angeles for murder. It would list the agency, Los Angeles Police Department, Van Nuys area, with my name and my phone number. If they have any contact with Glen Rogers and happen to run him, this warrant would show up in their jurisdiction and he'd be taken into custody.
Detectives sought out anyone who knew Glen Rogers. They learned he frequented local bars and worked odd jobs, mostly in construction. They visited several job sites, interviewing his friends and co-workers.
Through witnesses and friends, we learned that Glen did have a temper, and that when he drank, he did become enraged. There was domestic violence involved with former girlfriends. So we knew we were dealing with someone who could become violent, and generally violent when he drank, as it was in our case with Sandra Gallagher.
One of his friends said he hadn't seen Rogers in a while, but promised to contact the police if he heard from him.
Okay.
A few days later, Rogers' friend called. He said Rogers had phoned him from a motel outside Jackson, Mississippi. Local police talked to the motel manager, who told them Rogers' room number.
Police, open up!
The room was empty. The murder suspect was on the run. In the fall of 1995, the search continued for Glen Rogers. Police believed he fled California after killing a woman there on September 28th. A tip led to a Mississippi motel, but Rogers had disappeared before police arrived. Police issued an APB locally. They hoped someone would spot the suspected killer before he left the area. Days later, on November 3rd, 1995, Jackson, Mississippi detectives responded to a murder. Family members had found Linda Price dead in her bathtub. The 34-year-old single mother had been stabbed repeatedly and her throat had been slashed. Investigators searched the apartment for evidence. Technicians photographed the scene and lifted numerous latent fingerprints. They found no murder weapon. No valuables seemed to be missing. There was no apparent forced entry, and the killer had locked the door when leaving. The details of the crime scene led Jackson homicide detectives to conclude Linda Price had been killed by someone she knew. In the morning, they interviewed her mother. Perhaps she knew the killer as well. She said her daughter had a new boyfriend. His name was Glen Rogers. A month earlier, on October 3rd, Linda had met Rogers at the Mississippi State Fair where he had been working. He was charming, and Linda fell for him right away.
That's pretty close, huh?
They soon rented an apartment and moved in together. At first, Linda seemed happier than ever, but recently she wondered if she'd made a mistake. She told her mother that Rogers had a bad temper and she feared his mood swings. When Linda stopped calling and didn't answer her apartment door, her mother believed that Rogers had harmed her. Again, Rogers was nowhere to be found. Jackson detectives believed he had left the area. They entered his name into the NCIC database. Learning Rogers was wanted for murder in California, they contacted Detective Mike Koblenz in Los Angeles.
Jackson, Mississippi at that time contacted me, informed me of a murder they had, and they wanted more information on Glen Rogers as he was a possible perpetrator in that case.
The murders followed a pattern. The victims in California and Mississippi had both been charmed by Rogers. They had been isolated from others, then brutally killed just before Rogers fled the area. The investigators believed that Rogers was on a rampage that probably would not stop until he was found.
In our minds, we knew that we had a major problem going on here. We felt if he wasn't apprehended, that there could very well be more victims.
Jackson police asked the public to call if anyone saw Rogers in the area. Witnesses reported sightings, but Rogers stayed one step ahead of authorities. The detectives contacted the FBI field office in Jackson.
Hey, got you those pictures from the crime scene. I think you're gonna find.
They believed Rogers had left the state like he did after the California killing. Agents filed a federal warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Perhaps federal resources could help stop the killer. FBI Special Agent John Huber helped coordinate the multi-state investigation.
This case was very high speed, very fast. The murder he committed in Jackson was on November 3rd. It was Linda Price. Subsequent to that, he committed another murder on November 6th.
On that date, police in Tampa, Florida responded to a murder scene at a local motel room that had been rented by Glen Rogers. Like Linda Price, the young woman lay dead in the bathtub, stabbed in the back, chest, and wrist. There was no ID of the woman in the room, but investigators noted a tattoo of a cross on her shoulder. Her jeans and shoes were piled near the toilet. A bracelet was found in the sink. From the evidence left behind, Tampa homicide detective Julie Masucci attempted to piece together the details of the murder.
When we removed the clothing, it appeared that she had been stabbed through the clothing, which means that she was never undressed. And it was from the rear portion, which appeared that someone might have come up behind her and stabbed her.
The shoes had blood spots on the top, indicating she had them on and was standing when she was attacked. Under her body was a man's watch. Investigators believed it belonged to the killer.
It was significant that she was placed in a bathtub and that it appeared that someone tried to clean up any evidence that they left behind. We had found towels to indicate someone had wiped up blood off of a floor. It appeared that the bathtub water had been run to try and clean up any evidence that was left behind.
The detective interviewed the housekeeper who discovered the body. That morning, she had been making her daily rounds just after checkout time. Outside room 119, she spotted a handwritten "Do Not Disturb" sign.
Housekeeping!
She said she didn't clean the room the day before because she saw the sign and wanted to respect the privacy of the people staying there. On this day, the occupants were scheduled to have checked out. When she entered the bathroom, she made the gruesome discovery. Detectives asked the motel manager if she knew about the people staying in room 119. She recalled the man who rented the room because he requested a "Do Not Disturb" sign the day before.
They told him he didn't have one. So he paid for another night and told them at the registration that he did not want them cleaning his room. He wanted it to be left alone. Apparently he went back to the room and tore off a piece of a phone book and made his own "Do Not Disturb" sign, and he hung it on the door.
The motel manager remembered the same man packing up a small white car that evening. He had paid for another night, so she didn't think he was leaving. She warned him about recent break-ins at the motel and told him not to leave anything in the car overnight.
Thanks. Good, I'll come.
The detectives checked the office records, finding the registration card for room 119. It had Glen Rogers' name and signature on it. Technicians would later recover prints matching Rogers from the card. Detective Masucci ran a computer check and saw the California and Mississippi murder warrants. She contacted the other agencies and the FBI.
Then we started to realize very quickly into the investigation that there was a possibility that this man, Mr. Glen Rogers, was a serial killer.
The investigators knew who the killer was, but Tampa detectives still had not identified the female victim. She remained at the morgue as Jane Doe. If they could identify her, it might help them find the man who had killed her and at least 2 others. In the fall of 1995, after linking murders in California, Mississippi, and Florida to one man, the FBI and local detectives searched for accused serial killer Glen Rogers. The latest victim had been found in a Tampa motel room. She was still unidentified. Responding to media coverage, a woman whose daughter had been missing for 2 days came forward. She positively identified the body of her daughter, Tina Marie Cribbs. Tina had 2 children of her own. Tina's mother told Detective Julie Masucci about her daughter's last day.
We learned that Tina had worked and that she went to the Showtime bar, which is in Gibsonton, and she met some friends there. She was supposed to meet her mother there. Apparently it's like a family bar where a lot of people go, and there's televisions in there, and they just go and gather and talk.
Detectives visited the Showtime bar. The bartender said she knew Tina and her mother. She confirmed that Tina had been in the bar on November 5th. The bartender also remembered that a man named Glenn was there the same night.
How you nice ladies doing?
He talked with Tina and the
Let me
others.
do it for you, let the good times roll. You want bartender?
He bought a round of drinks with a $100 bill. The bartender said the man was very friendly and won Tina over quickly.
She started talking to a gentleman that was...
Eventually, he asked Tina for a ride home. He said his motel room was close and promised Tina would be back in time to meet her mother.
Everything's taken care of, right? All right, great, thanks.
Tina finally agreed and told the others she'd be right back.
When the mother came to the Showtime bar, she sat there and waited, and her daughter didn't show up. So she said she started beeping her to find out where she was. And she said that she had such a close-knit relationship with her daughter that she immediately knew something was wrong when she didn't answer her pages.
Detective Masucci also learned that Tina owned a white Ford Festiva, the same kind of car the Tampa motel manager had seen Rogers packing with suitcases. She updated the NCIC report on Rogers, adding the Festiva and its license plate number to the fugitive's information. FBI Special Agent John Huber was surprised that Rogers wasn't trying to conceal himself.
Glen Rogers seemed to not care if he would get caught or had no fear of the law. He would always use his real name when dealing with people and checking into motels. He would drive cars that weren't stolen, either belonged to the victim, which he could easily be linked to, or his own vehicle. He didn't seem to care. If people knew what was happening, he wasn't trying to hide.
The search for the serial killer hit the news. TV stations across the Southeast broadcast pictures of Rogers, asking anyone spotting him to call authorities. Hundreds of leads poured into the FBI. One promising tip came from a Jackson, Mississippi motel. 2 separate callers claimed to have seen Rogers there. Rogers had been in Jackson previously and was known to frequent small motels.
We set up a perimeter around the hotel, and then we had an entry team go up to the door.
Police, come to the door! Come to the door with your hands up! Come to the door! Hands are when you see them! Get your hands off! Hands off!
Agents were cautious until they could identify the man.
Put that on the wall! Where is it? Hands on the wall.
We identified the person that resembled Rogers and determined that it was not him. We then later searched the entire hotel and began searching the hotels in the immediate vicinity, but didn't find him. It was very important in this case to apprehend this individual as soon as possible, because based on his history, he was going to continue to kill until he was apprehended.
Authorities were desperate to stop him. The serial killer was out there somewhere, and it was likely that he was searching for his next victim. In the fall of 1995, suspected serial killer Glen Rogers had been last seen in Florida. The FBI believed he had murdered a woman there after killing women in California and Mississippi. The FBI soon learned that Louisiana had been his next stop. On November 10, 1995, Andy Sutton, a mother of 4, was found murdered in her Bossier City, Louisiana apartment.
Bruises on her legs.
Like 2 others, she had multiple stab wounds to her upper body and back. The Bossier City detective questioned the victim's roommate and former boyfriend.
9 o'clock.
Andy's roommate was a waitress and had worked late the night before Andy was killed.
Went in together.
When she returned home in the early morning hours, she heard the bedroom door close. She assumed it was Andy and her new boyfriend, Glen Rogers, in the apartment's 1-bedroom. Blankets had been left on the couch, and so she slept there. After daybreak, she was awakened by someone at the apartment door.
Would you tell Andy I'm here?
It was Andy's ex-boyfriend.
No, that's all right. I'm here now. I'd like to see Andy.
He wanted to talk to Andy.
I don't care. I'd still like to see him.
Stay there. Andy? Andy?
In the room, she found Andy's body under the sheet. She told detectives Andy had met Glen Rogers in a bar. They had been dating for only a few days. Neighbors had seen Rogers leave in a white Festiva. Bossier City detectives ran Rogers' name through the NCIC and saw the 3 other murder warrants. They contacted the other police agencies and the FBI.
Hey, detective, here's that fax report.
Los Angeles faxed a photo of Rogers to be used in the local investigation. Louisiana television stations picked up the story. Viewers were asked to be on the lookout for Rogers, but they were warned not to approach the deadly fugitive. Special Agent John Huber and the other investigators were frustrated.
Yeah, you know it.
Rogers was killing people faster than we could investigate where he was. It was just a kind of a time game, and he was killing people faster than we could apprehend him.
Hey guys, look at
The FBI and local detectives believed Rogers murdered 4 women in 6 weeks.
starting to move.
After each killing, Rogers had fled the state.
Let's try to focus.
The locations he chose were random.
Let's try to focus in. Let's try to focus in over here.
Despite their best efforts, investigators couldn't keep up. They needed to spread the description of Rogers and his vehicle across the country.
Let's start off with that.
Agents sent requests to truckers over their CBs to be on the lookout for a white Ford Festiva. They posted wanted flyers in truck stops and rest areas.
We're not really sure where he's going to be going next. That's why
They held press
below here is
conferences to get
photograph
Rogers' photo out to the public.
And Gallagher passed some of this out.
They wanted to warn
Right now,
potential
what we know
victims
is,
and hoped someone would spot the
that
killer.
we have already.
Through the media, agents released details of Rogers' MO for finding victims and the route he traveled.
Gallagher was viciously raped and murdered.
The FBI began the process of adding Rogers to their 10 most wanted list.
1996, at the rear of a convalescent.
Getting someone on the 10 most wanted list increases the amount of resources that the Bureau puts into a case. It also increases the amount of media attention that's also worked into a case.
The tips began to increase. One caller claimed Glen Rogers was at a pool hall in Mississippi. 2 agents responded. One of the pitfalls of an intense media campaign are the many false sightings that well-intentioned citizens call in.
Well, gentlemen, Special Agent Huber.
The man in the bar was obviously not Rogers. The investigators tried to predict Rogers' next move and focus their search. Special Agent Huber had worked plenty of fugitive cases.
A lot of times in fugitive investigations, when people are in trouble, they'll go to areas that they're familiar with, or associates or friends. In this particular case, Rogers' family and friends were mostly located in the Kentucky area, and that's where a lot of our resources were focused.
Authorities in Kentucky received priority teletypes about the fugitive. Kentucky State Police Detective Bob Stevens was already familiar with the name Glen Rogers. In fact, he'd been looking for him for almost 2 years. Rogers was wanted for questioning in the disappearance and possible murder of his housemate, 71-year-old Mark Peters. Almost 2 years before Glen Rogers' cross-country crime spree began, his brother had called the Kentucky State Police.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
The body had been found inside his family's cabin. Police believed it was Mark Peters. Peters had last been seen with Rogers. The cord tied around the corpse's hands and feet matched one found in the home the men shared. Authorities could not determine the cause of death, and they couldn't find Rogers.
1029 on it, please. The case is still ongoing and still pending. We had one suspect, which was Glen Rogers. We weren't able to track Rogers real well due to the fact that he traveled by Greyhound bus, by tractor trailer, cars. It was hard for us to track him. So we had a hard time trying to know where his next step was.
Still, the investigative focus in Kentucky paid off. On November 13th, 1995, Glen Rogers visited one of his relatives in Lee County, Kentucky. When he left, she called the Kentucky State Police.
Hi, I think you're looking for my nephew. Glen Rogers.
She said he was driving a small white car heading west toward Interstate 75. When Detective Stevens heard that Rogers was sighted nearby, he set up on the road he believed Rogers would take to I-75. It wasn't long before a white Ford Festiva drove by. The detective began following.
I wanted to make sure that this was Glen Rogers, not somebody else that I had actually followed in behind. So I pulled out behind this car. When I ran the car tags actually came back stolen. So I began to follow him. I was able to get up, pull up beside him like I was going to pass him. When I looked over, I could see who it was, and the picture I had of Glen Rogers matched the driver.
The detective requested backup. A local police officer was parked nearby. He joined the slow pursuit. They followed Rogers for a distance.
I think he was kind of watching me, and I was watching him. And I think by then he must have pretty much figured out that he had a police officer behind him. So we pulled up to a stoplight, and he ran the stoplight, and pretty much ran some people off the road as he was going through the stoplight. I fell in behind him at that time and activated my emergency equipment.
Rogers didn't stop. He sped up.
He's on to us now. Stand by.
Several miles ahead, police set up a roadblock and tried to clear the road of traffic. They hoped this would be the last stop for the elusive killer. On November 13th, 1995, Kentucky State Police set up a roadblock in an effort to apprehend suspected serial killer Glen Rogers. Armed officers waited at the roadblock.
Shoot his tires! Shoot his tires!
They fired at his tires, but they didn't stop the killer. Detective Bob Stevens was close behind.
We followed him down the road. He had run several cars off the highway, ran a school bus off the highway. He was driving on the wrong side of the highway. And so it was determined that he had to be stopped. Sergeant Barnes was able to get up the other side of him, and when he came back, he tapped him, spun him out of the highway, off the highway into a ditch.
They didn't know if the fugitive was armed.
When I first approached the car, and I was one of the first ones to approach the car, you could see that he looked very upset, very aggravated that he was in the custody. He was very defiant and just didn't want to be taken into custody at that time.
After a 2-month killing spree that spanned the country and left 4 women dead, Glen Rogers was finally in custody. The vehicle identification number of the white Festiva confirmed the car belonged to Tina Marie Cribbs, the victim in Florida. Technicians scoured the car for evidence. They found shorts with blood on them, a blanket, and a woman's purse. These and other items linked Rogers to the murders in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida.
Tell me a little bit about what you guys have.
The FBI served as the clearinghouse for the evidence. FBI agents and detectives from 5 states met in Kentucky to outline the case. Special Agent John Huber helped plan the meeting.
What they did do was put together all the information that everyone had, share information, and also that the FBI laboratory would process all the evidence in this case so that one agency would have custody of all the evidence and do the analysis.
Agents and detectives agreed that their best case against Rogers was in Florida. Tampa detective Julie Masucci met with detectives and prosecutors to review the evidence. They believe the watch found in the tub with the victim belonged to Rogers. A photograph of Rogers with Mississippi victim Linda Price revealed he wore that type of watch. Detective Masucci was confident in her case due to the physical evidence implicating Rogers.
We had Tina Cribbs' car that he was apprehended in. We had some shorts that belonged to him that had some of Tina Cribb's DNA on them, the registration slip that Mr. Rogers signed himself, fingerprints that were found inside of motel room number 119, where the victim was found, and miscellaneous items that were found inside of the car when he was apprehended.
On July 11th, 1997, almost 2 years after the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs in a Tampa motel room, Glen Rogers was convicted of first-degree murder and later sentenced to death in Florida. 2 years later, Rogers was extradited to Los Angeles to stand trial for the strangulation death of Sandra Gallagher, whose body was burned in a truck fire.
She poured over the victim's body and in the cab of the truck. He was seen...
Prosecutors outlined the victim's final hours for the jury. They showed that Sandra and Glen Rogers left McRed's bar together on September 28, 1995. At some point, there was a struggle, perhaps as Rogers made an unwanted sexual advance. He strangled her, crushing her windpipe. Attempting to destroy evidence, Rogers doused Sandra's body in the truck with gasoline and set it ablaze. Then he ran. On July 16, 1999, a jury again found Glen Rogers guilty of murder. He was sentenced to a second death penalty in the state of California. Los Angeles detective Mike Koblenz was impressed by the nationwide partnership of everyone involved in the hunt for Rogers.
That's really what made this case come together, was the interagency cooperation, and not just in Los Angeles, but in Jackson, Mississippi, Tampa, Florida, and later Bossier City, Louisiana, the FBI, the press, the different news agencies that were able to get the information out. We truly worked together on this, and it came to a successful conclusion down the road.
Since Glen Rogers already had 2 death sentences, Louisiana and Mississippi prosecutors decided to spare the families of the victims emotional trials. Glen Rogers left at least 11 children without mothers. The importance of stopping him was clear to Detective Julie Masucci and the other investigators.
As a woman, not as a detective, not as a police officer, but as a female, I think that there should be a lot of women that feel safe that he's off of the streets. He had no regard for human life. He had no regard for the feelings of the families that are left behind. He didn't care. And I'm happy that he's behind bars. And I'm happy that he'll never step foot outside of a prison system that he could put other females at risk.
Investigators suspect Rogers is responsible for more unsolved murders. He told family members during his rampage that he had killed dozens. Authorities continue to pursue those unsolved murders to close the cases that can be linked to Glen Rogers. In Los Angeles, a band of gunmen invade an armored car company. They grab millions and then vanish. When the FBI does find suspects, insufficient evidence prevents their arrest. Agents and detectives try to penetrate the gunmen's secretive world to bring them to justice.
armed robbery is a terrifying ordeal. When a gang descended on a Los Angeles cash vault, they threatened to kill anyone who resisted. The violent assault was the largest heist in U.S. history, and a piece of plastic was the only evidence. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI, LAPD, and the IRS joined forces to unravel a complex network of money laundering, fraud, and a tight code of silence.
The Los Angeles warehouse district is a tough, bleak part of town. Street gangs and violence are common. The area's businesses are housed in nondescript buildings, many surrounded by barbed wire fences. One secure block was occupied by a leading armored car company. Friday night, September 13th, 1997. Employees of the armored car company were going about their routine, counting and sorting over $20 million. The money would be dispersed to automated teller machines across Los Angeles to meet the weekend demand for cash. There were 5 employees, including 2 security guards working the graveyard shift. At 12:30 a.m., one guard took his break in the lunchroom, as he did every night. But he wasn't alone.
Hands up, on the floor now! We got one, we got the girl!
Five armed men subdued the guard in seconds.
Go! Let's go!
They dragged their hostage into an office where security monitors were kept. Then a second security guard, preparing to go home for the night, entered. Unarmed and out of uniform, he offered no resistance. Four of the assailants headed for the cash vault. The fifth held the guards at gunpoint and monitored the security cameras. The employees in the vault prep area were unaware that the building was under siege. The gunmen threatened to shoot if anyone disobeyed orders or made any sudden moves. The thieves now had direct access to the vault and its $20 million.
Put your head down! Get that head down! Number 3, stay on the workers.
One man appeared to be in charge, barking orders to his accomplices.
No, don't touch that. This bin over here, this one right here. Number 5, everything's on schedule.
He also used a concealed radio headset to direct others somewhere outside the vault. When commanding his men, the leader didn't use names, only a numbered code. The robbers were coldly efficient, wasting no movement. In less than 10 minutes, they wheeled millions to the loading dock.
No, this one right here, right here, right here. Number 6, come on up, we're ready.
In the outer office, the gunman removed the surveillance recorder bolted to a desk. Seconds later, employees heard more destruction in the back office. When the leader and another man returned, the employees no doubt feared it was to eliminate witnesses. But the assailants only stole the vault manager's pickup truck keys. Suddenly, it was quiet. Believing the gunman had fled, the guards risked freeing themselves.
I'll help you out in a minute.
They called 911. LAPD officers were immediately dispatched to the scene.
Okay, hold on. We're going to go down there right now.
Detective John Licata knew the case was unusual from the beginning.
We have experienced armored car robberies where the couriers or the truck are attacked. Got a robbery homicide. But this was the first time we've ever had a facility hit.
Officers secured the crime scene, and detectives began interviewing the employees. They said the 5 assailants seemed to move through the facility as if they had been there before. They didn't see them leave, but they heard the sound of a diesel engine pulling into, then out of the loading area. A 6th assailant must have been driving. One employee thought she recognized the voice of one of the gunmen as that of a former armored car driver for the company. She agreed to come to the station in the morning to study a photo lineup of former employees.
What's your name, sir?
Detectives spoke with the vault manager whose personal pickup truck and keys had been stolen. They wondered why his keys were taken and not the others. The manager said he parked in the same spot each night.
None of the suspects had asked him what the vehicle looked like. That led us to believe that whoever took his keys and had taken his vehicle knew him and his vehicle.
The manager agreed one of the men's voices was familiar, but he couldn't think of a name. He said he would contact them if it came to him. Forensic technicians took impressions of the facility's door locks. Initially, damage found on the doors and locks suggested the thieves used force to gain entry. But later examination by technicians in the police lab proved otherwise.
There was damage to the locks and the mechanisms, but not to the degree that it would have caused them to malfunction and to open.
They believed the gunman had used a key, then faked signs of forced entry. Company officials later estimated the loss at a staggering $18.9 million. The robbers knew what to take and what to leave behind.
All of the high cash bins, those bins that contained large amounts of cash, were taken. Those that didn't, that contained stamps and cash checks, were not taken.
This suggested that the assailants knew how the company stored its cash. The robbers also appeared to know where the company had installed its video surveillance recorders, including a backup machine that was hidden inside a locked cabinet in the back office. Employees had heard the assailants destroy the lock to get to the backup VCR.
The recording devices were kept in a cabinet, inaccessible to most employees. We interviewed all the facility employees, and 80% of them didn't know about the recording devices in the back office.
Investigators processed the loading area for any evidence of shoe prints, tire tracks, or clothing fibers. They found none. But they did discover what appeared to be a broken truck reflector or lens cover.
I personally spoke with the maintenance person that had cleaned the facility earlier in the day, and he assured me that that lens would have had to have been left there sometime in the evening. So it was surmised by us that it probably was left by the suspect's vehicle. We didn't have a lot of clues as to what the vehicle would be, other than that reflector that was recovered, and we didn't know if it was a common item taken off of trucks or vehicles.
Since the money stolen from the facility was federally insured, the FBI joined the investigation. Special Agent John McCarran from the Los Angeles field office studied a crime scene video made by the Los Angeles police that detailed the sequence of the gunman's activities during the robbery.
And put them in this room here. This door is unlocked. They laid both victims down on the floor here, and they also removed their keys. Once they did that,
the 5 masked gunmen had pulled off the largest cash heist in U.S. history. Agent McCarran hoped the public could help find them.
The media was given general descriptions of the individuals that committed the robbery as far as height and weight and clothing, and the fact that the individuals were all armed, and there was a posting of a reward at the time.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager hoped the vague descriptions would be enough to produce a lead.
The victims told us that they believed that the robbers were black, and that was based on the skin color that they saw through the eye holes of the mask. And they also told us that one of the robbers appeared to be lighter skinned, and he may be Hispanic. They were not able to see anybody's face.
But they had heard voices. At LAPD headquarters, one of the armored car company employees was shown a photo lineup.
See if we can finger this guy, okay? Take your time.
The woman believed she had recognized the voice of one of the robbers.
Don't rush. Take your time.
Now she was trying to match his voice to a face.
But here.
The lineup consisted of pictures of policemen mixed with several former armored car drivers and security officers. She picked one former driver as a possible match to the voice she heard on the night of the robbery.
Yes.
Police learned that the man had recently left LA for New Orleans. Agents from the FBI's New Orleans field office approached the former armored car driver at his family's home there.
Fine. I'm Agent Marks from the FBI. Is my partner. Is there a problem? No problem.
He said he was unaware that the company had been robbed and was willing to cooperate.
So why not? Come on in. Sure. Sit down in here.
He said that he had left his job on good terms a few weeks before the robbery.
It turned out that he was out of town on vacation during the robbery, and the agents were able to corroborate his statements about being out of town.
Thank you very much.
On the night of the robbery in Los Angeles, the man was 1,900 miles away in Louisiana.
Gentlemen, have a nice day. Thanks a lot.
So he was ruled out as a suspect.
Despite the false lead, investigators still believed the robbery had been an inside job. But whoever the gunmen were, they left little behind. And with $18.9 million in their hands, they could be anywhere. In September 1997, The FBI and the LAPD were unable to identify any of the 6 masked men who had robbed an armored car company of nearly $19 million. They believed at least one was a current or former employee, since the gang entered the building with a key and knew where hidden surveillance equipment was.
You made mention at the scene.
In his second interview, the vault manager on duty during the heist realized he recognized the voice of the lead gunman.
Plus, he just got let go, too, so maybe he's
He believed the man was Alan Pace, a former company employee. He thought Pace was one of the 2 gunmen who stole the keys to his pickup truck. Pace was familiar with the truck and had asked to borrow it before.
He would be the one to know what type of truck I drive.
FBI Special Agent John McCarran studied Pace's employment history.
Alan Pace was an employee who had worked for the company for approximately a year and a half. He was actually suspended the day prior to the robbery.
28-year-old Alan Pace had no criminal record, but when the company suspended him for disciplinary reasons, he had not turned in his keys. Investigators went to interview Pace at his home in Los Angeles.
Alan Pace.
Pace told them he knew about the robbery through the media, but assured the agents that he had nothing to do with the heist. He said he was at a party with his girlfriend on the night of the crime. He gave them her address and phone number. Investigators needed to verify Pace's alibi. They called in for a background check on the girlfriend. Detective John Licata learned she was a former employee too.
Mr. Pace's girlfriend worked in the facility in the cash vault area and specifically had a position that required her to handle the security video equipment. She had been terminated approximately 4 weeks prior to the robbery.
Investigators asked Pace's girlfriend about the night of the robbery. She confirmed that on that night, Pace and several of his friends attended an all-night party in Long Beach. She and Pace stayed at the party through the early morning hours of the following day. And there were plenty of witnesses who saw them there. Though suspicious, Pace's alibi was corroborated, and it was enough to block investigators temporarily. They would need a different tack to keep the case moving forward.
Yeah, John Licata here. How you doing?
The only physical evidence was a cracked amber lens found at the crime scene.
We're going to
They believed it came from a diesel truck used as one of the getaway vehicles.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
They needed to find that truck.
I got the assistance of some of my partners and half a dozen of us for the next 5 evenings between the hours of 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. Went to the location of where the armored car facility was and interviewed anyone that frequented the area either on foot or in a vehicle.
A week after the robbery, they patrolled the warehouse district near the scene of the crime. After several nights, they found a homeless man who lived on the streets in the area.
A few questions. What's your name?
Henry.
Henry, is this where you stay?
He said that on the night the robbery took place, he saw a mid-size rental truck idling near the armored car company.
What kind of truck?
It sounded like a diesel.
Big white truck?
He noticed it that night because usually there was little business or late-night traffic in the area. But he didn't see the driver. He'd never seen the truck there before or since.
Take care of yourself, Henry.
All right, sir.
The description of the diesel rental truck fit the victim's statements that they heard a diesel truck in the company loading area. Investigators suspected that the amber lens found in the loading area had fallen off that truck. Teams of agents and detectives canvassed facilities in the Los Angeles area that rented diesel trucks. They showed employees a photo of the partial lens found at the crime scene. Several recognized the lens as the type used on the running lights for a certain model of truck. The lenses were a problem because they frequently fell off and needed to be replaced.
There were 83 rental truck facilities that rented the truck that the lens most likely came off of. We subpoenaed documents from all the rental vehicles that they had rented 2 months prior to the robbery, for a period of time 2 months after the robbery.
Investigators spent hours poring through the rental records. But there were no rentals by Alan Pace or his girlfriend. It looked like another dead end. Authorities contacted Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager for legal advice on how to proceed.
You can't just go get a warrant because somebody's a suspect and you think that they did a crime. You have to have evidence that they committed the crime. Alan Pace had denied any involvement in the robbery and had even claimed that he was at another place. He had an alibi, which witnesses that we spoke to corroborated. So at that point in time, all we had was the fact that he was a disgruntled employee who had been fired the day before the robbery, and one of the employees believed that one of the robbers had a voice that was similar to his. And that clearly was not enough evidence.
To find out more, the FBI and LAPD began watching the former armored car company employee. If Pace was involved in the multi-million-dollar robbery, he might show signs of his newfound wealth.
We did do surveillance of Mr. Pace, and he did not appear to be living beyond his means. He didn't appear to be spending a lot of money. He didn't appear to have a lot of cash at his disposal.
Nothing implicated Pace in the robbery beyond the circumstantial evidence they already had. As the months passed, there was little movement on the case. The reward for information leading to a conviction now totaled $250,000.
Despite the extensive media publicity this case received and the rewards for any information about the perpetrators of this robbery, there were absolutely no leads, no forensic evidence, no eyewitnesses. The investigation just came to a grinding halt.
Though Pace was still the primary suspect, without more substantial evidence, the FBI was unable to make an arrest. For now, it appeared that Alan Pace and 5 accomplices had gotten away with nearly $19 million in cash. By September of 1998, a full year had passed since 6 masked gunmen made off with almost $19 million. The prime suspect was Alan Pace, a former armored car company employee, suspended the day before the crime. Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager was frustrated by the lack of evidence against Pace.
It didn't appear that he was out there spending money. It didn't appear that he had the fruits of the crime. So there really wasn't any legal basis to go out and arrest him or even to search his house.
Then, press coverage of the 1-year anniversary of the crime prompted a lead for case agent John McCarran. An informant called the FBI, saying he thought he might know one of the robbers. Investigators went to the informant's home in suburban Los Angeles. The informant explained he had been an employee of the armored car company a year earlier, around the time of the robbery. He had since left to become a real estate agent. He claimed that shortly after the robbery, he was given $100,000 in cash to purchase a home for a man he knew, Eugene Hill. Hill asked that the deed to the home be listed in the name of his girlfriend. At his girlfriend's apartment, Hill stored a trunk filled with smaller boxes. He gave one of the boxes to the informant. It contained cash, still bundled by bank wrappers, totaling $100,000.
The informant, when he received the money, noticed that the $10,000 bundles had these bank straps on them. He kept those bank straps.
They were dated the 2 days prior to the heist.
We were able to later determine the paper type wrappers actually came from some of the money stolen from the armored car company.
The informant said Hill changed his mind and asked for the money back, but in cashier's checks, not cash. The informant had kept $15,000, and Hill had recently begun threatening him. He hoped the FBI could protect him. Eugene Hill had no criminal record and had never worked at the armored car company. But a background check revealed Hill had a connection with prime suspect Alan Pace. Both had worked for another security agency in Los Angeles. Investigators began surveillance on Hill. At one point, they followed him to a business named Extreme Entertainment. The company billed itself as an entertainment service that provided everything from children's games to exotic dancers. Business records revealed that Eugene Hill was a partner in the company, along with Alan Pace. Investigators suspected that Extreme Entertainment was likely established to launder money from the robbery.
The Internal Revenue Service was brought on board and supplied with information from records and documents which would assist us in preparing money laundering charges against some of these individuals.
The investigative team learned more about the company. Besides Alan Pace and Eugene Hill, Extreme Entertainment listed 2 other men as partners, Terry Brown and Fred McCrary. The 4 had worked together at the same LA security agency before Alan Pace was hired at the armored car company. Extreme Entertainment's accounting books looked suspicious to Los Angeles IRS Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Philip Mullins.
There were 4 suspected robbers involved in Extreme Entertainment. Extreme Entertainment wasn't really generating very much income, but there was a lot of cash going through the business, into the bank accounts, and then a lot of money being paid out in salaries.
Investigators began to dig deeper into the financial backgrounds of the 4 partners. They subpoenaed bank statements, credit card reports, and tax returns. In the personal bank records of Eugene Hill, they found the suspect had a second source of income.
One of the things that we discovered were deposits of checks from a company called Rainforest. Now, we'd never heard of Rainforest, and we didn't know what kind of company it was, so we went and looked at the Rainforest bank records. And we found that in addition to writing regular monthly checks to Eugene Hill, Rainforest was also writing checks on a regular basis to somebody named Thomas Johnson.
Like Hill, Thomas Johnson's position at Rainforest was listed as a consultant. It was unclear what type of consultants they were. Rainforest was in business developing new recycling technologies. Johnson and Hill had invested $2 million in the company. The investment in a legitimate company was a classic money laundering scheme.
You take bad money, you invest it in something, you hide it, conceal it, and ultimately end up with something that looks legitimate.
Investigators felt confident that the 5 men were strong suspects, but so far, no evidence connected them directly to the $18.9 million robbery. LAPD Detective John Licata and his partner, Detective John Wong, cross-referenced the suspects' names against truck rental records from the time of the robbery.
Sure, that'd be fine.
Detective Wong made an important discovery.
My partner, John Wong, is the one that found the rental agreement from one of the suspects, Eugene Hill, in which he had rented the suspect's vehicle that was used that night just prior to the robbery and then returned just after the robbery.
We were able to locate that very truck. It was still in the Los Angeles area. And we got that truck and we removed the light assembly and had the FBI forensics lab compare it to the lens that was found on the loading dock area.
They needed to know if the amber lens had fallen off that truck. While waiting for the lab results, investigators looked further into suspect Thomas Johnson. Johnson lived in an expensive home in an upscale Las Vegas neighborhood.
The IRS conducted surveillance of his residence, and during that period of time, his girlfriend at the time was identified.
Agents flagged the girlfriend's name. If Vegas police ran into her, they should call LA. On the night of September 10th, 1999, nearly 2 years to the day after the robbery, the team in LA got a call and boarded a helicopter. There had been a domestic disturbance at Thomas Johnson's Las Vegas home. Johnson's girlfriend had called the police. They hoped to use the disturbance call as an opportunity to question the girlfriend. She alleged that Johnson had beaten her. She was more than willing to answer any questions they had about him. She said Johnson was laundering money through the Las Vegas casinos. He and a friend would buy thousands of dollars in chips that he would later have her exchange for cash. The exchange was always in amounts less than $10,000 to avoid filling out cash reports.
Thomas Johnson appeared to be very fond of gambling and appeared to have a lot of money with which to gamble. And it's a little tricky when you do these types of investigations because you don't know where that money is coming from, if it's perhaps gambling winnings that are then being used to conduct more gambling activities, or if it's perhaps what we thought, which was money from the robbery.
The girlfriend told investigators Johnson had mentioned a big job that he had taken part in back in Los Angeles. She said Johnson had invested in a company with a gambling friend. When investigators showed her a photo of Eugene Hill, she confirmed that he was Johnson's friend. The circumstantial evidence against Thomas Johnson, Alan Pace, and Eugene Hill was building. But it was still not enough to make any arrests. Agents would need to turn the suspects against one another if there was to be any hope of convictions. Two years after 6 masked gunmen robbed an armored car company of $18.9 million, the FBI, IRS, and LAPD had gathered strong circumstantial evidence against 5 suspects, but had nothing that directly tied the men to the crime. The only physical evidence recovered was a cracked amber lens found in the loading area of the armored car company. Investigators believe the lens fell off a truck rented by suspect Eugene Hill the day before the robbery. They sent the broken lens lenses and the other lenses from the truck's running lights to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. Forensic metallurgist Michael Smith compared tool marks from the broken lens to those on the other lenses from the truck.
In this case, the marks look rather like the rings on a tree, and we attempt to see whether those marks line up or not.
Using a high-powered comparison microscope, he made an exact match. The same tool had made all the lenses in the same work session, indicating the broken lens had very likely come from the truck rented by Hill. The forensics results were compelling, but they did not definitively prove that Eugene Hill or the other 4 suspects were with the truck during the robbery. Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager needed stronger evidence before authorizing arrests. She hoped Hill's girlfriends would provide it.
We had identified 2 of his girlfriends who also appeared to be spending not large amounts, but amounts of cash. Approximately 2 years after the robbery, we had gotten to the point where we needed to talk to these women that were in Eugene Hill's life.
We're going to need your cooperation.
Worried that charges might be filed against her, one of Hill's girlfriends rolled, telling investigators what she knew. She told them that after the date of the robbery, Hill suddenly had a lot of cash. She said Hill stored 2 footlockers filled with boxes of the cash in her apartment. She and a friend helped him count and sort thousands. Hill told her that before the new crisp bills could be spent, they needed to look worn. So she washed them. Usually, Thomas Johnson took part in the operation. She said they would go to Las Vegas, buy gambling chips with the washed bills, and then turn them in for new cash. Her story corroborated the statement previously given by Johnson's girlfriend. In return for her testimony, prosecutors agreed not to file charges against her. Next, FBI agents and LAPD detectives wanted to talk to Eugene Hill's sister. They had some questions about bank accounts the IRS had uncovered.
We were able to subpoena her records and determine that she had several accounts that she was holding in trust for Eugene Hill. Those records showed that there were a lot of unexplained cash deposits into those records, and it also appeared that checks were being written for motorcycles and vehicles and other consumer goods. So now we had a little bit more indication that Eugene Hill was perhaps spending money that he really couldn't explain receiving.
She agreed to talk to the investigators, but said she first needed to make a phone call. She stepped away and appeared to send a numeric page. Investigators asked her about the accounts she held for her brother. She was evasive and claimed to be unaware of any of her brother's financial matters. Moments after the phone call, Eugene Hill arrived. When questioned, Hill denied any knowledge of the armored car company robbery. He told investigators that he didn't have time to answer their questions then, but he would meet them the next morning at their office. Loaded with cash, Hill was a significant flight risk. The FBI called Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager for advice.
I was just getting ready for bed. The phone rang at home, and the agent said, this is what Mr. Hill wants to do. Should we let him go? And it was just one of those split-second, decisions that had to be made. And I made the decision that we were not going to let Eugene Hill go. We were going to arrest him that night.
As Hill was heading back to his car, he was placed under arrest. With only circumstantial evidence connecting him to the robbery, it was a risk. The law requires an expeditious trial, and the clock had begun to tick. On September 23, 1999, the FBI arrested Eugene Hill, one of 5 men suspected in an armored car company heist. Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager had made the decision to arrest Hill, despite having only circumstantial evidence linking him to the crime.
By letting Hill go, there was a real danger that he would have alerted the others to the investigation. Given the amount of money that was taken in this robbery, it was apparent that these robbers would have the means to flee if they wanted to. And I just felt we couldn't take that chance.
A search of Hill's home provided no solid evidence tying Hill to the robbery. But investigators did discover ledgers that showed Hill had purchased real estate in other people's names. Prime suspect Alan Pace was also listed on Hill's ledgers as having purchased real estate in others' names. Finally, IRS agent Philip Mullins had something on Pace.
This was very significant in that there was over $1 million worth of real estate purchased for Alan Pace, that he had no legitimate source of income to purchase that property.
If convicted, Eugene Hill was facing up to 40 years in prison. Hoping for sentencing consideration, he confessed and promised to tell police everything he knew.
Who's this Alan?
He said Alan Pace recruited him and 3 others for the robbery.
Alan Pace told him that he had already spoken to Terry Brown and Freddie McCrary, and they were ready to do the job. And he wanted Eugene Hill to come on board and maybe bring another person in. So Eugene Hill approached Thomas Johnson, who agreed to participate, and that's where the plan was hatched.
Hill confirmed Pace was the mastermind of the heist and leader of the gang. Hill knew all of the men except for the 6th, who was a personal friend of Pace's. Pace told the others his plan could set them up for life.
5 to 6 employees at most.
Alan Pace told them that they would do the robbery on Friday night when there would be very few employees working there. He said that he knew who those employees were, that they wouldn't offer any resistance, and that it wouldn't be a problem. They would just tie up the employees, take the money, and they'd be in and out, within half an hour.
Following orders, Hill rented the diesel truck on the day of the robbery and met up with the gang at the party in Long Beach. Shortly before midnight, they left the party one by one. They drove to the warehouse district. Then 5 walked to the armored car company. During the robbery, 1 man stayed with the truck, waiting a few blocks away for the call to pull in. When the truck arrived, they loaded it up. Pace knew to take the surveillance equipment. They later transferred the money to a storage unit rented by Thomas Johnson, where it remained for 2 weeks. 4 of them left in the rental truck. Eugene Hill and Alan Pace drove away in the vault manager's pickup, since Pace knew where he parked each night. The 6 men disposed of the guns and VCRs, changed their clothes, and returned to the party as if nothing had happened. In the time it took others at the party to drink a couple more beers, the gang had committed the largest armed robbery in U.S. history. Investigators needed to corroborate Eugene Hill's story. FBI Special Agent John McCarran and his team believed Thomas Johnson should be the next one taken.
Agents in our Las Vegas field office were conducting surveillance on Thomas Johnson, and we knew his exact location. We followed him from one of the casinos.
Agents tailed Johnson as he visited several casinos. They did not know if the suspect was armed. To execute a safe arrest, agents needed to isolate Johnson outside and away from the casino crowd. They asked a casino security guard to approach him with a ruse. The guard told Johnson his car had been hit and that he needed to go outside to fill out a report. Johnson took the bait. As he checked his car, agents safely took him into custody. Investigators laid out the case against him and the possibility of decades in prison. Like Eugene Hill, Johnson cooperated in the hopes of a lighter sentence. Johnson verified Hill's version of the robbery and confirmed that Alan Pace was the leader. Investigators finally had sufficient evidence. They quickly arrested everyone but the leader.
We knew that Pace was aware of the earlier arrest of the other individuals. There was a warrant for his arrest, and he contacted me here at my office and told me that he wanted to self-surrender.
On February 28, 2000, Pace arrived at the LA Federal Building in the company of his lawyer. He made no statement and refused to cooperate with investigators. Pace was arrested and held without bail. 4 of the robbers pled guilty to robbery and conspiracy. Eugene Hill was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Thomas Johnson received 10 years. Fred McCrary received 7.5 years, and Terry Brown got 8. The 6th gunman, Eric Boyd, fought the charges against him and was found guilty and sentenced to 17 years. After a 3-week trial, Alan Pace, who had orchestrated the armed robbery, was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Agents seized all of the criminals' assets. They were able to account for about $5 million of the stolen money.
So about $14 million remains missing. We don't know where that money is, how it was spent, if it was spent. We just have no idea.
But whenever the felons are finally released, the FBI will be watching.
No one drops a dime on nobody, okay?
If they make any moves to recover hidden money, they'll go straight back to jail. On the glittering streets of Las Vegas, ruthless gunmen overpower defenseless victims and haul away a motherload of cash. Following a trail from exotic dance clubs to the tranquil suburbs, authorities finally put down the reckless robbers. But a daring jailbreak leads the FBI to a violent showdown with a man so desperate, he'll risk his own family to get what he wants.
In Las Vegas, a gang of robbers targeted an ATM repository and hit the jackpot. They take over $1 million in cash, the largest heist in Las Vegas history. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The robbery was well planned and precisely executed. The FBI and local police struggled to identify and track a desperate criminal whose tendency for violence turned a robbery into a case of murder.
Las Vegas, a gambler's paradise, where even criminals sometimes try their luck. On the night of December 21st, 1998, a Las Vegas couple and their 18-year-old sister-in-law prepare to go to work. The family owns a janitorial service that cleans commercial buildings. Suddenly, two masked gunmen rush up and force them inside their own van. For the cleaning crew, an ordinary workday has just become a night of terror. The gunmen blindfold and tie up their three captives.
Well, shut her up! What are you looking at? Sit still. Sit still. Don't move.
They can hear the gunman talking to a female accomplice on a radio.
Let's go. Car 2, are you in position?
The gunmen seem to know the janitor's routine. They drive around until 11 p.m., the time they are scheduled to begin work at the Bank of America building. The gunmen even park where the janitors routinely park their van.
Get out. Let's go. Your feet down. Let's go, girl. Get out of here. Next.
The building is Bank of America's central ATM repository in Las Vegas.
Let's go.
Cash from 1,200 automated teller machines, often totaling more than $1 million, is delivered there each night. The gunmen force the janitors to use their key card and access code to unlock the door. This bypasses the bank's alarm system.
Get in there. Get in there. Let's take it. Get over there. Come on. Sit right here. Sit down. Look, turn around. Turn around.
The gunmen release the couple and order them to clean the building as they normally would.
Turn around. Look.
They keep the wife's sister hostage to ensure the couple complies with their orders.
She is dead. You hear me? She's dead. Act like you're cleaning. Get out! Now! Get out.
At 11:30 p.m., an armored car arrives to pick up the night's cash deposit. Following a standard security protocol, the two guards first call the bank security company to ask if there have been any unauthorized entries.
We're checking out the parking lot, don't think.
The alarm company reports that the only people inside are the janitors. The only vehicle the guards see in the parking lot is the janitor's van. Inside, everything seems completely normal. The janitors are too terrified to say anything. The life of an 18-year-old girl is at stake. The guards open the vault containing $1,088,000. Shrink-wrapped and ready for pickup. Suddenly,
Get down! Get down! Get on the floor! Get your hands up!
as the gunmen disarm the guards,
Stay down.
one of them accidentally discharges his weapon. The bullet ricochets off the floor and hits one guard in the chest.
Come on, let's go!
What happened?
Hang on.
One of the guards calls for an ambulance.
12. My partner's down. He's been shot. I need an ambulance quick, please. Please.
FBI Special Agent Henry Schlumpf arrives at the scene. He heads the investigation.
Everybody was very scared, and it took a little while to calm everybody down and to get a story as to what exactly happened. And the descriptions that we got, because the subjects were masked, were very general in nature. We were looking for 2 males who were either white, black, or Hispanic, 6 foot, 6'3", and about 200 pounds. That was basically all the description that we had.
With little to go on, every detail is important.
The janitors told us that when the subjects first entered the bank, they were a little taken aback at the number of video cameras that were in the bank. That indicated to us that they had not been inside before.
This suggests that the robbery may not have been an inside job. Agents interview a truck driver who witnessed the robbers leaving the depository.
Turned over to here, looks like 2 guys just...
The truck driver was making a late-night delivery to a nearby store.
He saw 2 men run out of the depository and throw some bags in the back of a white Chevy S10 pickup truck.
And they just took off in that direction.
Authorities begin searching for the getaway truck.
I put out the announcement for all responding units to look for a white Chevy S10 pickup truck. It wasn't very long after that the vehicle was found about a quarter of a mile from the depository, just parked on a residential street.
Investigators run the truck's plates. Ironically, the truck is a police maintenance vehicle that was stolen from a Las Vegas Metro Police lot 1 week earlier. Investigators begin questioning neighbors, including a woman whose home is closest to where the truck is parked.
She hadn't seen anybody get out of the pickup truck, but earlier in the evening, there had been another truck parked in the same place. And she described that as a white GMC dually, which is a pickup truck with 4 wheels on the back axle.
Agents believe the woman saw the robbers switch vehicles, a common MO for bank robbers. They issue an APB for the white GMC truck. Hours later, they receive the welcome news that the wounded guard has undergone surgery and will survive. The next day, the bank determines that a total of $1,088,000 has been stolen. To date, it is the largest bank robbery in Las Vegas history. Although FBI agents believe this was not an inside job, they cover all their bases by interviewing the armored car guards and all bank employees.
We didn't have a lot to go on. We ended up interviewing everybody who worked at the branch and everybody who worked at the armored car company and polygraphing some of them.
Although agents do not find any new information, they do rule out the employees as suspects.
Thank you. The subjects who committed the robbery could have found out everything they needed to find out by following the armored truck around and following the guards around. And we surmised early on that that's probably exactly what they did.
With the investigation running out of leads, executives from Bank of America and the Armored Car Company decide to offer a reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the robbers. Agent Schlumpf advises them on how large the reward should be.
And I said $50,000, which was quite a lot for a bank robbery, but we were going to need to generate some public interest in this case.
Agents ask local authorities for their cooperation.
We notified the airport that we were looking for someone carrying large amounts of money. We notified all the jails to advise us if anyone tried to bail someone out with large amounts of cash.
A week after the $1 million robbery, the FBI receives a call from security at Las Vegas's McCarran Airport.
They got a telephone response from someone asking if large amounts of currency would set off the metal detectors. and they took the number down on caller ID and gave it to us.
Investigators use a reverse telephone directory to find the caller's address. Agents set up surveillance on that address, a home in the suburbs of Las Vegas.
There were people going in and out of the house about every half hour. Someone would arrive and someone else would leave. But it's curious, and I'd kind of like to know what's going on.
After several hours, agents decide to interview the people in the house.
Hello, how are you? I'm Investigator Davis from the Las Vegas Police Department. This is Special Agent Reed.
It was just a piano teacher who was giving half-hour lessons, and she was going to be going to Utah with about $3,000, and so she had called McCarran Airport to find out if that would set off the detectors.
The lead is a dead end. Agents are back where they started. But later that day, a woman responding to the reward poster calls the Las Vegas Metro Police. She claims to have key information about the bank robbery.
So tell me about this stripper friend of yours.
Mom, her name's Jennifer.
The tipster tells agents about a dancer she knows who works at a local strip club.
Oh, Fuzzy Bottom. You know, over on Tampa.
Her name is Jennifer Arden. She says Jennifer has been spending a lot of cash lately.
He was able to give us a telephone number. We traced that number to a rented trailer.
The FBI sets up surveillance on the trailer. Agents watch for any clue to the identity of the two gunmen or the location of the stolen $1 million. In a matter of minutes, a white GMC truck pulls into the driveway. It's the same make and model the robbers used as their getaway vehicle. Agents run the license plates. According to the Department of Motor Vehicles, the truck is registered in Las Vegas to Timothy Blackburn. The driver enters the house and leaves minutes later. The surveillance team immediately notifies Agent Schlumpf.
The sighting of the GMC pickup gave us enough probable cause to get a warrant for the trailer.
Moments later, a SWAT team surrounds the trailer.
To serve the warrant, we brought a lot of people with us because we knew we were looking for armed and dangerous subjects. They had already shot one person. We knocked on the door of the trailer and nobody answered, so we kicked the door open and served the search warrant.
The SWAT team finds one man in the trailer. He identifies himself as Riley Bates. He reveals that Jennifer is his girlfriend. One team of agents begins searching the trailer for evidence, while another heads to the strip club to question Jennifer.
FBI, I'd like to ask you a few questions, please.
About what?
You've been spending an awful lot of money.
The exotic dancer told us that the money was her money that she had made over the past 4 years dancing, and that she didn't know anything about a robbery or anything else.
Back at the trailer, agents continue to search for clues. In the bedroom, they find a heavy-duty combination safe. It looks brand new.
The trailer was filled with trash, and it was not the kind of place where you would expect anybody with any money to be living. And yet here they had this brand new safe they had bought.
What's the combination?
Riley claims the safe belongs to his girlfriend, and only she knows how to open it.
We'll find out.
Agent Durham, may I help you? Jennifer, what's the number to the combination of the safe?
The agent asks Jennifer for the combination.
It's not my safe, it's my boyfriend's.
But she says Riley has it.
How would I know the combination?
Did you hear that? She said she doesn't know what the combination to the safe is. The safe belongs to her boyfriend.
So we go back to Riley Bates and tell him that his girlfriend said he had the combination, so then he told us the combination.
Yep, that's it.
Inside the safe, the FBI finds $50,000 in cash and bags of marijuana.
I told you, man, I was selling pot. I told you.
Riley insists that he made the money by selling marijuana and claims he knows nothing about the robbery. Agents strongly suspect he is lying. But with over $1 million missing, where is the rest of the money? Las Vegas, December 1998. A team of violent bank robbers shoot an armored car guard and flee with more than $1 million. A tip leads the FBI to a rented trailer and a brand new safe containing $50,000.
Bunch of cash in here.
Jennifer Arden, an exotic dancer, claims she earned the money dancing. Her boyfriend, Riley Bates, says he made the money selling marijuana. Now agents must find the rest of the money. Over $1 million in cash. The FBI calls in one of their top interviewers, Special Agent Brett Shields, to try to get the truth from Riley.
Where's that money from? You're getting a lot of trouble here.
We tried to remove him from his comfort zone and took him out to my car where he's a little bit more on edge rather than at the comfort of his own home.
Yeah. You're gonna get in a lot of trouble here.
Yeah, Riley Bates was a shifty little guy. He knew he was in a tough position because we'd found the money in the trailer.
He tried to maintain that it was profits from the marijuana that was found in the safe. It wasn't believable that he was that successful and he's still living in a single wide trailer.
You're gonna be in a lot of trouble here, you know that? I don't know what you're selling pot.
We had gotten convinced that we can help him out on the marijuana charges and he doesn't want to get tied up into the $1 million bank robbery.
He said, I didn't commit any robbery. So now Agent Shields and I know, we're probably about 2 questions away from finding out who did. So we said, okay, Riley, you didn't commit the robbery, but I believe you know who did commit the robbery. And he said, my brother Robert and his friend Tim.
It's my brother and his friend Tim. Really? Yeah. Well, where is Tim right now? I don't know where they are right now.
Riley claims that he doesn't know where his brother Robert is.
Where are they? But I don't know where they are.
But inside the trailer, agents find gaming chips and receipts from the Luxor, a casino on the Las Vegas Strip.
So we sent a couple agents to the Luxor, and they contacted management, and sure enough, Robert Bates was staying there.
The hotel's head of security tells agents that Robert Bates has been spending heavily, paying for everything in cash.
Located where, sir? That's in the southeast town. You see the types of items that they're purchasing.
Judging from his guest portfolio at the Luxor, Robert Bates had been just partying constantly since the night of the robbery.
The 2 agents stake out Bates's hotel room until he returns.
He was on some kind of drugs. There's no point in trying to interview someone if they're stoned on whatever he was on.
Bring your hand back, Mike.
Inside Bates's hotel room, agents find drugs, a gun, and $5,000 in cash. With nearly $1 million still missing, agents now concentrate on the second suspect named by Riley Bates, his brother's friend, Tim Blackburn.
We set up surveillance on Timothy Blackburn's house. So we had police and FBI agents surrounding the house.
They decide to approach Blackburn, but proceed cautiously. He's been investigated for armed robbery in the past and is considered highly dangerous.
Tim Blackburn was about 26 years old, 6'3", 230 pounds. He was a martial arts expert, and he liked fighting, and he liked guns. He was an accomplished marksman.
The FBI's criminal apprehension team moves into position. Special Agent Castle Nishimoto is a member of this elite tactical unit.
My job was to watch the streets. I knew he was armed, but I wasn't particularly scared at that point because I felt confident that I would be able to spot him, and from where I was watching.
The agents were just approaching the house to make contact with the people inside when a car comes driving down the road.
The SUV suddenly accelerates towards the agents. The driver loses control.
And the vehicle stops, and a man jumps out and runs away. We assumed it was Blackburn who had run out of the car.
He was jumping the fence, the walls in the back of the house and so forth, and trying to get away. And so from that point on, we began to search the area.
The driver of the vehicle is Blackburn's sister-in-law. Authorities take her into custody. The FBI and Las Vegas police launch a house-to-house search for Blackburn. Two blocks away, a canine unit picks up the fugitive's scent.
Come out with your hands up! You got me. Come on out! You got me. Move it! Your hands! Don't make me send the dog. Come on!
Blackburn was found by a canine unit hiding under a deck in someone's backyard. He had a mask and he had an ankle holster.
Fortunately for the canine officer, the holster was empty.
There's nothing in it, man.
Blackburn had lost his gun jumping over fences.
Hands behind you. Back.
Sorry, we got him. We'll take him inside for questioning.
I don't have him. We're gonna find this.
Investigators searched the suspect's home while agents questioned Tim Blackburn and his wife, Sophia.
Because I know that you know what's going on. I know that you know where the money is. Can you tell us where the money is now, where it's been put?
They offer Blackburn a reduced sentence if he will admit to the robbery.
I don't have any money. If you don't see it, it's not here.
He refuses. Investigators continue to search the house.
An evidence response search is very methodical. It's not just everybody running around to where they think something might be hidden. Everything is photographed first, and then the search progresses room by room, and then the outside is usually done at the end. They find some flex cuffs, like were the same type that the janitors had been bound with, and they found some walkie-talkies and some other surveillance equipment.
I got something here.
Early that morning, in Blackburn's backyard, they find several duffel bags inside the doghouse.
I just couldn't believe that he put the money in the doghouse. And then on second thought, I thought, well, maybe that might not be a bad place to put the money, since nobody looks there. It's just an innocuous place.
Investigators recover more than $900,000, 90% of the stolen money.
It took about 10 hours to count it. So by 4 o'clock that afternoon, we knew we had the money from the Bank of America robbery.
The U.S. District Court charges Tim Blackburn and Robert Bates with bank robbery, kidnapping, carjacking, and using a firearm in the commission of a violent crime. They are held at the North Las Vegas Detention Center. But the FBI's work is unfinished. They believe that Blackburn and Bates were not working alone.
We knew that there was probably someone else involved in the robbery, that it was too much logistically for only two people to do.
You know, your husband was...
Agents suspect Sophia Blackburn might be involved because her story does not seem credible.
I was at the house several times to talk to Sophia Blackburn. Sophia claimed to have no knowledge of the robbery, and in fact, she provided an alibi for Tim Blackburn on the night of the robbery. She said she was with him the whole night. She couldn't account for the money that they found or the other items that were in the house. She was worried because her husband was in jail and she had two young daughters to raise herself, so she was claimed to be cooperative, but she would have these stories that were in no way even close to plausible. But that's what she was going to stick with. And, there was not going to be really any way to talk her out of them. There was no way that she was ever going to give us any information that would implicate Tim Blackburn.
On August 11th, 1999, 7 months after the $1 million robbery, Sophia visits her husband in jail.
You can't tell him where I am.
She secretly uses a tiny tool on her keychain to loosen the screws securing the divider window.
That's good. So my babies are doing all right, man.
Babies are great.
As the visiting room guard leaves to escort a prisoner, Blackburn removes the bulletproof glass.
Tim Blackburn climbed through the window and dived into the sally port. The one door closed and the second door opened before anybody realized what he had done. As soon as the second door opened, he was just climbing over everybody in the sally port and he ran outside.
Sophia retrieves a gun she had hidden earlier and tosses it to Blackburn.
All the alarms are going off, and guards outside knew that there was a jailbreak.
As the Blackburns try to get away, they face startled guards in a violent shootout. August 11th, 1999. Timothy Blackburn, accused of the biggest bank robbery in Las Vegas history, breaks out of jail with the help of his wife, Sophia. FBI Special Agent Henry Schlumpf.
They tried to arrest Blackburn, but he shoots at them. This pickup truck that's sitting in the lot was going to be his escape vehicle. But the guards are returning fire.
Blackburn is forced to abandon the truck. Suddenly, his wife Sophia roars up in an Isuzu Rodeo. In a matter of seconds, they are out of range.
It was hard to believe that Blackburn had actually escaped from the jail because although a lot of people want to escape from the jail and many attempted, very few actually get away. But it just pointed out again how unpredictable Blackburn was.
Looking for leads, FBI agents Henry Schlumpf and Brett Shields tracked down the suspect's relatives.
Blackburn was going to have to go someplace to get some help.
Agents check out an apartment building where Blackburn's sister-in-law lives. Parked out front, they find the same Isuzu Rodeo used in the jailbreak. They run the plates and discover it belongs to Blackburn's wife, Sophia.
We see the truck in the parking lot. So now our heart's racing just a little bit more. Adrenaline's pumping. Since he was in federal custody, it falls under the U.S. Marshal's jurisdiction as well. So I called some Marshal friends of mine. We're sitting on this truck, not knowing if he's going to come back out to this truck, and we're going to have a confrontation right there before the Marshals get there.
After a few tense moments, U.S. Marshals arrive to help FBI agents raid the apartment.
Step outside. Can we go inside? Search your premises?
But Blackburn isn't there.
Or may have been used in the commission of a crime.
Agents ask the fugitive's sister-in-law where Tim Blackburn is. She says she doesn't know.
This could be extremely
They ask why
serious.
Sophia's Isuzu is there and not her own car, which authorities know as a Nissan Pathfinder.
It's going to be as bad for you as him.
She claims it's in the shop, but her story does not check out. Agents suspect Blackburn is on the run with her Pathfinder.
Can you tell us where it is?
No, I have no idea where it's at.
For the next week, the FBI searches for Blackburn, his wife, and their 2 little girls. They come up empty. Then, 9 days after the jailbreak, a Las Vegas police helicopter spots a Nissan Pathfinder parked in the desert. A family of 4 is nearby. The FBI and Las Vegas police arrive in force.
Now we have no shot.
Special Agent Castle Nishimoto leads the FBI SWAT team.
We were located on a ridgeline quite a bit above them, and there was a valley between us.
We can see some people about half a mile away, too far away to identify them.
If law enforcement tries to move any closer, they will have to move through an unprotected open space.
We had to keep our distance from these people, because if it was Blackburn, he is a marksman.
Nevertheless, Agent Schlumpf daringly volunteers to drive down for a closer look.
It did take some courage, because the only coverage he had would have been the snipers. And they had at least 300 or 400 yards shot, as I recall.
As Agent Schlumpf gets nearer, he can finally make out faces.
I could recognize that it wasn't Blackburn. It wasn't anybody who we were looking for.
Authorities have hit another dead end. But Agent Schlumpf also realizes that authorities cannot continue to respond on such a massive scale.
There must have been 100 vehicles in this valley. All the SWAT vehicles and evidence response team vehicles and police cruisers. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, we can't be doing this every time someone says Tim Blackburn. I mean, nobody's got the resources and we're going to burn ourselves out.
The next night, law enforcement pursues the dangerous fugitive with every available resource.
We had about 40 agents, police, marshals, Henderson Police Department, detention center people. We got everybody together, and we divided up into teams. And what we were going to do was interview every one of Blackburn's associates, search every house, find every vehicle that he could possibly have access to.
U.S. Marshals tell the FBI they have spotted the fugitive.
We arrive right as they're taking down what they believe is Tim Blackburn.
I could tell right away it wasn't Tim Blackburn, it was his brother. His brother is a younger, slightly smaller version of Tim Blackburn, very similar in appearance. As we're IDing him, what we notice is that his driver's license was brand new. He had just gotten it the day before. So we asked him, well, what happened to your old license?
On the hood.
Blackburn's brother claims he lost his license. But agents suspect he gave it to the fugitive to use as a fake ID. In the car, agents find a note from Tim Blackburn. In it, he asks his brother to get him some money. A man who once had $1 million in his possession now needs a loan to survive.
We decided to arrest him for aiding and abetting a fugitive. So that's what we did. We arrested Tim Blackburn's brother.
Authorities also arrest Blackburn's sister-in-law for lying to federal authorities when she said her Nissan Pathfinder was in the shop. With 2 of his family members in custody, agents develop an ingenious plan to lure Tim Blackburn into the open. In Las Vegas, a violent bank robber breaks out of jail with the help of his wife. After 3 days of eluding authorities, agents decide to turn up the heat on the dangerous fugitive.
One of the people we wanted to talk to that night was a close friend of Blackburn's who worked as a bouncer at a local gentleman's club. Most people who knew Blackburn either liked him or were afraid of him. And neither opinion was really conducive to providing information to us. His friend was really no exception. He didn't want to tell us anything, but eventually what he told us was that Tim Blackburn had called him at the time he was escaping. Blackburn had called up and said, I'm out, and this friend could hear the sirens and stuff in the background.
You're the last guy that we know of.
So I told this friend, you are the last person who Tim Blackburn talked to that we know about. And I think he's going to call you again. And when he does, we want you to tell him that we've arrested his brother and that the people who have assisted him are going to have to pay for what they did to help him. This putting pressure on Blackburn was an effort to try to get him to realize he couldn't really escape, to get him to turn himself in wherever he was at. The next morning, this friend called me up and told me that, sure enough, Tim Blackburn had called him again, and that he had told him that I'd arrested his brother and his sister-in-law. And, I asked him what did Blackburn say, and he just said he was mad.
2.5 weeks after the jailbreak, FBI agent Henry Schlumpf learns that Blackburn may have returned to Las Vegas.
I got a phone call from a Las Vegas SWAT officer. He had just met someone who gave him some information regarding Blackburn's whereabouts in Las Vegas, which to my mind was doubtful. I doubted Blackburn was in Las Vegas. But I asked the officer to ask this fella if he knew the names of Blackburn's daughters. And sure enough, this informant did know the names, so at least we knew he did know Blackburn.
The informant claims Blackburn is staying at a motel that caters to long-term guests. Agent Schlumpf and 2 Las Vegas SWAT officers rush to the location.
You seen these two before?
The manager says he's never seen the Blackburns before and they are not registered at the motel.
Okay, that's your register. I'm gonna get that. Do you have a key?
Still, Agent Schlumpf decides to rent a room so he can surveil the facility.
Okay.
SWAT officers call in the license plates of every vehicle in the parking lot. None of them are reported as either stolen or owned by any of Blackburn's relatives. The motel tip is beginning to look like another false lead. The FBI does not give up. They begin checking every apartment.
So what we decided to do was to perform a ruse. We would have a complex security guard just start knocking on doors and notifying the residents of noise complaints. I'm there watching, and the door opens, and Sophia Blackburn comes out to talk to the guard. I couldn't believe it. There she was. She looked happy and smiling and well-rested, better than I'd ever seen her. She did not look like she'd been on the run for 17 days.
Suspecting that Blackburn is hiding in the apartment, Agent Schlumpf calls for immediate backup. The criminal apprehension team in Las Vegas SWAT arrive within minutes.
SWAT responded right away. More agents came, and a lot of patrol units, marshals came. And what we did was we started evacuating the complex. Every apartment was evacuated except, of course, for the one where we thought Blackburn might be. And then we did what we do in 99% of our fugitive cases. Our criminal apprehension team placed a call into the apartment.
I need to talk to Timothy Blackburn.
What they do is they tell the person in there, look, we know you're there. You're surrounded. There's no way that you can get out. So come on out.
We just want to find a nice, peaceful way to end this whole thing.
So I'm waiting for Blackburn to come out, and I'm deciding, where are we going to take him? Back to the jail he escaped from or to a different facility? And that was my mindset. If he was in there, he was going to come out. But he doesn't.
Agent Schlumpf, he wants to talk to you.
The apprehension team person was on the phone, and she says he wants to talk to you.
Hello, Tim.
And sure enough, it was Tim Blackburn. And my job was just to keep him talking on the phone, because as long as he's talking on the phone, he's not shooting anybody. When I first started talking with Blackburn, I was kind of commiserating with him, telling him, you know, it must have been hard being on the run for the last 3 weeks.
Hey, I took the kids to San Diego. Have you ever been
So
to San
here he
Diego?
was, maybe 10 minutes from Mexico, and he didn't go there. He came back to Las Vegas.
Agent Schlumpf cannot understand why Blackburn has returned, but is even more concerned that his children may be with him.
Why don't we just talk about...
Then his worst fears are realized. He hears the 2 little girls laughing in the background.
There's children inside the room. Repeat, there's children inside the room.
The SWAT team set up outside the apartment, and they were there to initiate a hostage rescue if Blackburn turned violent and started hurting any of the people in the apartment, Sophia and their 2 little girls. He says, Henry, I don't suppose you can just let us go. And I told him, I can't do that.
I'm not going back to jail, man. I'm not going back to jail. Look, I don't want my kids to visit me in jail.
Tim was set on not going back to jail. He said he just wasn't going to go back. And, after shooting a guard, there's no way any of that is going to go away.
Schlumpf worries that Blackburn may be suicidal.
Hey, Tim, it's time to come in, buddy.
Authorities now face a dangerous scenario. A hostage barricade situation involving an armed man, his wife, and 2 small children.
Look, I'm not going back, man. That's just it. I'm not going back to jail. I'm not going back.
The FBI and police SWAT teams surround a motel just off the Strip in Las Vegas. A violent bank robber has barricaded himself inside one of the apartments.
I'm not going back, man.
Tim Blackburn is armed and emotional. Inside the room with him are his wife Sophia and his 2 daughters.
Oh, you came back.
FBI agent Henry Schlumpf tries to talk the desperate man into surrendering.
Come on out.
Although negotiators are present, Blackburn refuses to talk with anyone but Agent Schlumpf, who months earlier had arrested him for bank robbery.
I'm not going back to jail, man. I don't want my kids to visit me in jail.
Agent Schlumpf pleads with both Blackburn and Sophia to let the children leave the apartment.
Slow it all down.
Sometimes I talked with Sophia and sometimes with Blackburn. It seemed like maybe we were getting a little farther ahead talking with Sophia, but then when we take a break and she talked to Blackburn, we kind of have to start over again. He had a lot of influence with her, because he's her husband. She was afraid that if she were to leave with the children, that Blackburn would kill himself. And, she certainly didn't want that to happen. We'd take breaks, and then I'd call in again. There were highs and lows. Sometimes it seemed like we were making progress. Other times, we took a couple of steps backward.
So, Henry, what's the best place to shoot myself in the head, huh?
He asked me what I thought would be the best place for him to shoot himself. And I told him that we had a lot of other things that we could talk about and try to work out before it came to that.
How are the kids doing?
Blackburn says he put his daughters in the bathtub to protect them.
For their own protection.
But the SWAT commander is concerned. Confining them could also be the prelude to a murder-suicide pact. The SWAT team prepares to blow the door in case they need to rescue Sophia and the children.
The SWAT team placed an explosive charge on the door, an entry charge, so to be able to breach the door very quickly if they needed to.
After 4 long hours of negotiation,
had to go clear to the back, into the bathroom, to try and rescue the children. And in this case, seconds, fractions of seconds count.
They got there just in time to see Blackburn falling down from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
They find Sophia dead. Both the children have been shot in the head and are barely alive.
I saw them running very quickly to try to save the children.
The SWAT team got them to the paramedics, but they died in their arms.
I felt quite saddened that my fellow SWAT officers tried their best and yet wasn't able to save the children. Our mission was to save lives, and we were not able to accomplish that.
It was just devastating. It was like the worst possible outcome.
The coroner later determines that the shots that killed Blackburn, Sophia, and their 2 little girls were all fired by Blackburn himself. A few months later, in federal court in Las Vegas, Riley Bates and his girlfriend plead guilty to possessing stolen money. Because of their cooperation, they are sentenced to only a year. Blackburn's sister-in-law is sentenced to 1 year for lying to federal agents and impeding their investigation. Robert Bates pleads guilty to bank robbery and is sentenced to 24 years in prison. Today, Agent Henry Schlumpf has made his own peace with the tragic events caused by Tim Blackburn.
He's ultimately responsible for everything that happened. He came back to Las Vegas to do exactly what he did. He came back to die. I don't think he was gonna ever come out of that apartment or let anybody else come out of it either.
Las Vegas law enforcement will never forget the deaths of 2 innocent children. For them, the Blackburn case is all about lost hope and the tragedy of a desperate agenda. In 1982, a California Highway Patrol officer pulled a young woman over for speeding. He bullied her into sex and then killed her. He then used a decade of police experience to try to cover up his crime and convince local investigators of his innocence. But would he get away with it?
Society depends on trust and authority. It's a system that works, and because it works, we hardly think about it. A uniformed officer demands respect, and we willingly comply. But what if that trust were betrayed? What if a police officer abuses his authority? George Gwaltney was one such cop. The popular and decorated California Highway Patrol officer committed the ultimate violation. He murdered. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. When good cops go bad, the full power of law enforcement rallies to repair the damage, rebuild the trust, and deliver justice. The Gwaltney case taxed the resources of both state police and the FBI. He was a cunning adversary, trained in crime solving, and he knew how to cover his tracks.
23-year-old Robin Bishop had left her home in Las Vegas to visit a friend in Los Angeles.
But then you gotta carry trays, so you gotta work on yours.
Robin had hopes of becoming an actress. Her friend convinced her that if she was serious about acting, she had to move to L.A.
Okay, let's see.
Robin headed back to Vegas to pack up and make the move. She was excited about her future. In Barstow, California, she stopped to call her mother and get a sandwich. Returning to her car, she fell under the gaze of a predator, California Highway Patrolman George Gwaltney. Though he was a highly respected officer and member of the community, Gwaltney had a secret history of stopping women for speeding and then soliciting them for sex in exchange for getting out of a ticket. The night of January 11th, 1982 was no different. He quickly memorized the make and model of her car. He also noticed the Nevada license plate. Next, Gwaltney saw a neighborhood boy he knew, a boy who, if necessary, could be used as a convenient alibi.
Hey, Preston, you want a ride?
He picked up Preston Olson and gave him a ride home. A former winner of the Officer of the Year award, Gwaltney was well known for such kind actions. Barstow parents trusted Gwaltney to keep a protective eye on their children. He dropped Preston off at his house and said hello to his parents. By now, the young woman whom Gwaltney had targeted would be well out of town, headed toward Nevada on Interstate 15. The ordinarily well-traveled highway was unusually quiet. He caught up with her on the empty highway east of Barstow. He turned on his light and siren and pulled her over. Robin Bishop had a string of tickets for speeding. She had in fact just finished a year of probation and had been given a warning that another ticket would cost her her license. Robin knew that a car and a driver's license would be essential for an aspiring actress in Los Angeles.
Okay, do you have any idea how fast you were going?
Pretty bad.
Just a little bit too fast. I'm gonna have to ask for your license, man. Okay, Robin, I'm going to have to ask you to get out of the vehicle and follow me back to my squad car.
She left the keys in the ignition and her purse in the car.
Let's take a little walk back to the squad car.
Robin was probably surprised to be taken back to the patrol car, but she obeyed. Unfortunately, Gwaltney had more than a speeding ticket in mind.
Go ahead and turn around for a chance on your head. I'm going to have to kick you in.
For speeding?
Yep, that's the law.
I was just speeding.
Gwaltney stood her up against the patrol car and handcuffed her. As he put her into his back seat, she must have been scared and confused. Why the handcuffs? Where was he taking her? Gwaltney returned to her car to get her purse. At that moment, a car with a lone driver passed by. Gwaltney retrieved the purse, returned to his car, and pulled away, leaving her car abandoned on the interstate shoulder. He drove Robin to an exit that led to a seldom-used access road running parallel to the highway. It was a place he often went to take a break during his patrol shift, a secluded lookout point where he could observe the highway some 400 feet away, clearly from all directions. There, holding the threat of jail or loss of license over her, Gwaltney raped Robin Bishop. When he was done with her, he radioed in a wants and warrants check on Robin's car as if it were abandoned. He knew he'd been spotted walking towards Robin's empty car.
Yeah, I'd like to report a 2829. Yeah, license number 561 FBD.
It was the first in a long line of lies covering his actions for the official record.
Copy that.
He drove her down the parallel access road to a point where Robin could walk back to her car. He removed the cuffs and let her out of the car. Things were working out for Gwaltney. He'd gotten what he was after and was simply going to let her go. But as she sat on the ground to put on her boots, something happened. Perhaps anger replaced fear now that she was released. Perhaps she threatened him with exposure. Her brother was a prosecutor in Nevada. Regardless, it would be her word against his. But then, as he stood next to his vehicle, he was suddenly caught in the spotlight of a passing deputy sheriff's car. The deputy may well have noticed Gwaltney's patrol car from the highway nearby. Gwaltney could not know whether he had been recognized. Suddenly, Robin's threats became more real. How could he explain being out there on the access road? In a moment of panic, Officer George Gwaltney decided Robin had to be silenced. Gwaltney took a final and irrevocable step. Now, there was no way to distance himself from the dead girl. Frantic, he devised a way out. He called the dispatcher and reported finding a dead body, a possible suicide. Knowing he had only moments before other officers would arrive at the scene, he searched under her head for the bullet that had killed her. As evidence, the bullet had the power to destroy him, but there was no exit wound. Homicide Detective Milt Rose of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department was sent to investigate the dead body found by Gwaltney. On his way to the crime scene, the dispatcher asked that he examine the abandoned car. As the body had been found a short distance away on the access road and was visible to investigators already at the crime scene, the police suspected there was a connection between the car and the body.
I did not see any obvious signs of any malfunctions. No mechanical breakdowns. The tires were all in good condition. The vehicle was in gear. The keys were inside the vehicle. Why did the vehicle stop at the location it was at?
At the crime scene, Officer Gwaltney was now composed and professional. He described how he found the victim, checked for a pulse, and looked in her purse for identification. The Nevada vehicle registration and driver's license identified her as Robin Bishop, owner of the abandoned car he had called in earlier. Although Officer Gwaltney had reported an apparent suicide, Detective Rose quickly ruled out that possibility. The victim had been shot in the back of the head at close range, then moved slightly. 4 inches from her head was a stream of blood on the ground. Clearly, this was a homicide. Recent rainfall made tracks and footprints from Gwaltney and his cruiser clearly visible in the damp sand.
In this general area, we found a couple of footprints that came around, appear to come around the front of the vehicle. They travel around in the front of the vehicle and off in a direction sorted towards the middle area of the vehicle. We travel over here into an area about where this bush is located, or right in this general area, and that's where Robin Bishop's body was found. The other footprints that we found were leading from the driver's door on the highway patrol unit to an area towards the front of the vehicle and then over towards Robin's body, kind of facing off in the easterly direction.
The first officer arriving on the scene criticized Gwaltney for the profusion of his footprints. a clear contamination of the crime scene and uncharacteristically sloppy work.
Why are you going to do this? You need to come to the crime scene.
Further examination, I noticed what appeared to be marks on her wrist.
The marks were familiar to any police officer. 2 thin marks across the top of her wrist and 1 across the bottom, typical of those made by handcuffs. Then, when Detective Rose examined the contents of the victim's purse, he could find no signs of robbery, but the vehicle registration and driver's license were lying on top of the purse's contents, as if they'd been shown to someone and quickly thrown back into the purse.
It indicated to me that we needed to take a look at some type of vehicle stop or somebody in some type of position of authority possibly stop this car.
To Rose, the evidence pointed to the involvement of a police officer or someone posing as one. Every investigator at the crime scene was either a friend or a colleague of Officer Gwaltney. That he might be connected with the crime was not even considered at this point. An autopsy was performed. The results confirmed that the body had been moved slightly after being shot, and that the bruises were in fact made by handcuffs. The fatal bullet was found lodged in Robin's jaw. Though it was the caliber of a standard police service revolver, the brand was not the standard ammunition. The autopsy also showed that she had had sex within 24 hours of her death, but there were none of the normal physical signs of a forcible rape.
The first thing we needed to do was to eliminate people that had been to the scene or could have been in the area. Other highway patrol officers, other deputies, whoever was in that particular area around that time frame. We needed to start with Officer Gwaltney to begin with because Officer Gwaltney was a person who found the body.
Gwaltney's survival depended on staying one step ahead of the investigation. When he finished his shift that night, he struggled to remove the gun barrel from the murder weapon. It was the one piece of hard evidence that could conclusively implicate him in the crime. Gwaltney knew his gun barrel left identifiable markings on the bullet that killed Robin Bishop. The next morning, he went to a local gun shop to order a new barrel, which would confuse a ballistics test. But the barrel was not in stock and had to be ordered. Then he took his uniform to the dry cleaner and his holster to the repair shop for re-dyeing and restitching. All that remained was to stall for time until the gun barrel arrived. In Barstow, Rose held a briefing that morning with the police and sheriff departments to discuss the case. He asked all officers on duty the night before to turn in their weapons so that ballistics tests could eliminate them as possible suspects in the crime. Gwaltney made sure to attend. During the briefing, he learned that the fatal bullet had been recovered. By early evening, Gwaltney was the only officer who had not turned in his weapon for testing. The detectives went to his home and asked for his service revolver. He returned moments later with the wrong gun, his off-duty weapon.
George, this isn't your service revolver, and that's what we need.
Service.
The captain sent him back for his service revolver, but he returned empty-handed.
You aren't going to believe this, but it's been stolen.
What do you mean stolen?
Stolen? Well,
George,
there's been some burglaries in the
He claimed
neighborhood.
that his house must have been burglarized. The gun was missing.
have to ask for your...
The story sounded doubtful,
formality.
but because Gwaltney was a highway patrol officer, Detective Brian English with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department was inclined to believe him.
I kind of empathized with him because we were, in my opinion, we were looking for evidence to show that he didn't do it. It was some criminal that did it. You know.
Gwaltney agreed to come to headquarters for questioning. But first, the detectives searched his locker for the missing weapon. They found nothing.
Then we sat down and we started talking with Officer Gwaltney. And to him, it didn't appear important that his gun was gone, which was very significant. And if I was in his position, I'd have been extremely worried, and it didn't seem to bother him.
By now, it was almost 2 days after the crime. The missing weapon and Gwaltney's odd behavior made it impossible to deny the obvious. Gwaltney was advised of his constitutional rights. Although this made him the primary suspect in the case, there was insufficient evidence to actually arrest him. Insisting he was innocent, Gwaltney agreed to give a tape-recorded interview.
That we can record on tape about the night that Robin was shot. Yeah, I have no problem with that.
He said he'd worked his regular beat patrolling the interstate on January 11th. After his dinner break, he had picked up a young boy he knew, Preston Olson, whom he had seen walking home alone. After dropping Preston off at his house, he was by 8:50 p.m. back on the interstate. About 9:15, he found the abandoned car, ran a stolen vehicle check, then turned onto the access road. Seeing a pale shape, he had pulled over. It was the body of the victim, Robin Bishop.
He was not reacting normally for a person who had been accused of committing this kind of a crime. Had it been me, I would not be talking to them. I'd tell them to prove it. I'd be very irate. I'd be very upset.
Officer Gwaltney had repeatedly insisted on taking a lie detector test. He reiterated his statement and then answered a series of critical questions, including the direct question, had he killed Robin Bishop?
No.
The examiner could find no sign of deception in the polygraph exam. Gwaltney had just crossed another hurdle in his cover-up.
We transported George from the Barstow station back down to San Bernardino for further questioning. At that time, George gave his consent to go ahead and search his house.
Sheriff's deputies investigated Gwaltney's claim that his house must have been burglarized, but they could find no sign of forced entry. The homicide detectives then began their work. At dawn, they found the frame of a Smith & Wesson Model 19 .357 Magnum revolver inside Gwaltney's truck. The frame was badly damaged with tool marks. It appeared to have been dismantled by someone who had no knowledge of how to take it apart.
The barrel, which would have been used for a ballistics comparison, was gone. Therefore, there's no ballistics match could be done.
The gun frame was registered to George Michael Gwaltney. To the detectives, it had been dismantled for only one purpose. Gwaltney was placed under arrest. But the evidence was still only circumstantial. A link between the revolver and the tools used to dismantle it had to be found. The detectives returned to Gwaltney's home for another search. Evidence was collected. Gripping-type tools and a pipe vise found behind the garage that showed fresh signs of metal transfer. In the bedroom closet, detectives found 5 boxes of bullets bearing the CHP insignia. In the boxes among the standard police rounds, they found 27 bullets of another brand. 357 caliber 158 grain soft points made by Remington Arms, the same kind of bullet that killed Robin Bishop. Gwaltney's wife was in a state of shock and disbelief. When questioned, she assured the detectives again and again that George had not been acting strangely or in any way different lately. He was a good husband and a good father to their children.
He's a wonderful husband, a very caring father.
News of Gwaltney's arrest stunned the small community of Barstow. His fellow officers had known and respected him for decades. Despite the considerable evidence against Gwaltney, they were unable to accept his possible guilt.
Pretty dramatic and emotional thing when another law enforcement officer is accused of committing a murder.
Most of the people knew George, and they could not believe that George Gwaltney could have done something so bad.
I recall a couple of the officers that were close friends of his were in tears when I was interviewing them because they didn't want to believe that George could do this.
Even the investigators struggled to come to grips with the conclusion they had been forced to draw.
my feeling was, he didn't do it. He couldn't do it. He's a highway patrolman.
But the evidence continued to mount. Semen was found in the backseat of Gwaltney's cruiser and in Robin's jeans. A critical report was filed by Sheriff's Deputy Roger Kaufman, who had been out of town the days following the crime and had only just learned of Gwaltney's arrest. He described driving by the exact crime scene area about the time of the murder. From the interstate, he spotted a car's parking lights on the little-used access road. Shining his spotlight on the car, he saw an officer standing by it, but was driving too fast to identify him. Barely minutes later, he heard a very upset Gwaltney calling in a possible suicide on the radio. He'd been surprised to hear Gwaltney, a man known for his unshakable presence, sounding so agitated, but had not given the incident any thought until he learned of the arrest. As the investigation progressed, it became apparent that Gwaltney had used his knowledge of investigative procedure to thwart detectives' efforts to collect evidence against him. His uniform had been dry cleaned, his holster re-dyed and re-stitched, allegedly for an upcoming inspection. Any evidence of blood or tissue transferred from the gun had been destroyed. His footprints had altered the crime scene. When detectives questioned the owners of gun stores in the area on the theory Gwaltney would have tried to buy a replacement barrel for his service revolver, none could recall him being in their stores. After several months of an internal investigation, Gwaltney was fired from the California Highway Patrol.
Okay, bye.
Now convinced that he had committed the worst imaginable crime, detectives were still unable to prove Gwaltney was lying. His wife and friends still solidly supported him. 9 months later, the trial began, with prosecutor Betty Kennedy confident that the considerable evidence, though mostly circumstantial, was strong enough to result in a quick conviction. In his opening statement, defense attorney George Porter told the jury that George Michael Gwaltney was the victim of a frame-up, possibly by someone in his own department. Someone stopped Miss Bishop, as he would show, but it was not George Gwaltney. The defense produced a key witness, railroad worker Dennis Gubler, who testified that he had passed Robin Bishop's empty car on the highway shoulder that night. A light-colored car was parked 50 feet behind it. Gubler described to the jury a man carrying a flashlight who was approaching Bishop's car. His description, however, seemed to eliminate Gwaltney as the man he saw. Other suspects, Porter contended, must be considered. The prosecution constructed a precise and elaborate timeline for the jury, from Robin's final phone call to her mother in Barstow to Gwaltney's radio call reporting the discovery of her body. The timeline included all of Gwaltney's known actions and time for the murder as well. The prosecution believed its case was bulletproof. Travel times, the pickup of the Olsen boy, the deputy's sighting, the radio calls, everything. But Gwaltney's attorney countered by producing dozens of witnesses, CHP colleagues and personal friends who testified to his impeccable character and record. He used the timeline itself to cast doubt on the series of events. Could Gwaltney possibly have had enough time, barely 20 minutes, to do all he was accused of? The defense easily challenged the scientific analysis of the semen samples from the car and the victim. The technology for using DNA in the courtroom was still 6 years in the future. In addition, Porter was able to cast doubt on the prosecution's inconclusive tool mark analysis of the gun frame and tools taken from Gwaltney's vehicle and residence. Nevertheless, the prosecution believed the bullet evidence and the dismantled gun frame would be enough to convince the jury.
The strongest evidence that we had in a particular case was the frame of the gun. How can you explain the frame? How can you explain why it was in the vehicle? Why was it taken apart? Why was the barrel missing? Why was the cylinder missing? The grips, the hammer, the trigger? Why?
Gwaltney was prepared and polished, providing the defense with its best witness, himself.
He had an answer for everything that was questioned to him. And every answer he had was feasible. And what their defense tactic was to put a small amount of doubt into each one of the items of evidence that we presented. And that's what they did. And George did an excellent job of tying up all the loose ends when he testified.
In the end, the testimony of 50 witnesses in 30 areas of expertise and all the accumulated evidence failed to convince the local jury. After 4 days, a deadlock was declared, 8-4 in favor of acquittal. George Gwaltney was a free man.
Nothing is, as some people say, a slam dunk. And you never know which way the jury's going to go. You never know which evidence the judge is going to let in and which evidence the judge won't let in. So, because I wasn't involved in the daily routine, I was very much surprised that George was not found guilty.
We spoke to a number of the jurors, and a few of the jurors thought there was a good possibility George was the one responsible, but they couldn't believe he actually did it. And if he did do it, he was a highway patrolman. He worked hard. He worked for the community. He was respected. We just couldn't find him guilty.
Still believing George Gwaltney was guilty, prosecutors were determined to get a conviction. Less than 1 year after the mistrial, Gwaltney was tried again in Superior Court. But with little new evidence presented, the trial ended in another deadlocked jury, 7-5 in favor of acquittal. George Gwaltney walked away, seemingly out of reach of the law.
I was stunned. I sat around for several hours just thinking about it, rehashing what could have we done to change the outcome. What could we do if and when there's another trial?
Arguing the appearance of harassment, the judge denied prosecutors a third trial. It appeared that George Gwaltney could not be brought to justice in the town of Barstow.
We felt, and I was convinced, that George killed this lady and that we needed someone to come in and prosecute George. George needed to pay for what happened.
From the moment of Gwaltney's arrest, the FBI had been watching this case with great interest. Anytime a homicide involving a police officer takes place, the FBI monitors the investigation. After Gwaltney was acquitted a second time, there was enormous public pressure to find the truth surrounding Robin Bishop's murder. The FBI's Los Angeles field office decided it was time to intervene. The FBI knew that George Gwaltney could never be tried again for Robin Bishop's murder in the state of California. But in a federal court, he could be charged with violating her civil rights. By killing Robin Bishop while he was on duty, George Gwaltney had committed a federal crime. By taking her life, he had violated her civil rights. This had never been argued in a criminal trial before. But the FBI and federal prosecutors believed the Bishop murder was a perfect test case. The case was assigned to Special Agent Michael Randolph.
Gwaltney was like a wolf in the sheep pen. The local law enforcement didn't know that he was the perpetrator. He was the person that had committed the murder, so he would stay one step ahead of them, destroying evidence. And this is a significant reason that the locals were unsuccessful in their prosecution. They didn't realize what they were dealing with.
Exhaustively reviewing the crime scene photographs, Agent Randolph's attention was caught by a photo. It revealed the contents of the trunk of Gwaltney's patrol car the night of the murder. In it, he spotted a small box of ammunition. He sent the photos off for enlargement and analysis.
We were notified by the FBI laboratory that photographic analysis revealed that that was a box of .357 Magnum ammunition and was in fact illegal ammo of the type that Gwaltney had testified he did not carry and was not carrying the night of the murder. It was also, we believe, the same box of ammo that was collected from his house.
Agent Randolph had just caught George Gwaltney in his first lie.
We knew that he had lied about one thing at the two local trials. There had to be other things that he had lied about.
Working closely with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department and the California Highway Patrol, Agent Randolph began re-examining virtually all of the evidence from the first 2 state trials.
Instead of handling it as a usual criminal investigation, we took an exhaustive approach, sort of like a TWA Flight 800 approach. Every rivet had to be looked at, every rock had to be looked at.
The mountain of reports, transcripts, photos, and physical evidence would be painstakingly re-examined by the FBI labs and Bureau field agents.
Key things that were used that we sent back to the lab would include such things as, obviously, the frame of the gun. The frame of the gun had been recovered by the local police, and they had done tool mark analysis but had been unable to show who took the gun apart.
The gun frame was sent back to the Firearms Tool Mark Unit of the FBI labs in Washington. Unique in the world, the lab has a collection of over 2,000 guns, from John Dillinger's pistol to the newest military assault rifle. Every bullet manufactured for the last 50 years is here too. Hollow point and steel jacket, 22 to 50 caliber. Like the guns, they're all here for testing and comparison. The soundproof ballistic room allows for comparison firing and bullet retrieval. Comparative microscopes allow for precise analysis of the gun barrels. But the most valuable asset in the lab are the agents, whose long experience in these specialized tests make them invaluable in difficult cases such as the Bishop murder. Jim Cadigan of the FBI Firearms and Tool Mark Unit was brought into the case to conduct a tool mark analysis of the gun frame and the 15 different wrenches and tools, including the pipe vise, taken from Gwaltney's home. Steel tools almost always leave behind some distinctive and often microscopic mark after their use, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. The FBI Tool Mark Lab is one of the largest, most specialized, and most technologically sophisticated in the country.
It was obvious from the beginning that the individual that had worked on this particular firearm knew something about forensics because he had removed several pieces of the firearm that could be of some use later on to a forensic examiner.
Agent Cadigan approached the very specific task of associating the tool marks on the gun frame with the tool marks made by the 15 gripping tools taken from the Gwaltney home.
The question was, could one of these tools have been used to hold the frame while the barrel of the firearm was being removed? In looking at the frame, I noticed near where the hole was for the pin that locks the barrel down, very near the hole for that, there was a small 1/16 of an inch impression, almost as if it was made by a small screwdriver tip, right below that hole.
This tiny mark matched a small imperfection in one of Gwaltney's tools.
In looking at the tools that were submitted from Gwaltney, I noticed that one of those tools, a pipe wrench, had a broken tooth. And the tooth was broken off in the middle, and then there was a small island of metal left on the tooth. And that looked very similar to the mark that was on the frame. So using that as a pivot point, I started making impressions with that tool and comparing those impressions under a microscope, the tool marks, with the impressions that were on the frame, and was able to come to a conclusion that that particular tool was used to the exclusion of any other tool to make the marks that were found on the frame.
In addition to the tool marks testing, the FBI lab conducted extensive testing on the particular bullets found in the Gwaltney home. The lack of a barrel on Gwaltney's gun made a ballistics test impossible, a problem that had hurt the prosecution in the state trials. So the FBI lab devised a test that had never before been used forensically, a radical new use of nuclear technology in forensic science.
When a manufacturer of lead like Remington Arms makes a batch of lead, they throw things in much as you would when you're making meatloaf. That makes each batch of lead unique. We then took over 200 rounds that the locals had collected when they did their investigation of George Michael Gwaltney. We submitted those to the lab. The lab made those radioactive and got their molecular weight, their chemical fingerprint, and lo and behold, we find approximately 27 rounds that are the exact match as the lead taken from the head of our victim.
The samples in the reactor absorb neutrons and become radioactive. This radioactivity is measured and gives a precise reading of the chemical elements in the lead from the bullet, an atomic fingerprint. The radioactive tests were indisputable. Each of the 27 bullets found in Gwaltney's closet, bullets he had sworn under oath he did not own, had come from the same batch of lead as the bullet that killed Robin Bishop. The FBI lab worked to establish a definite match between Gwaltney's gun frame and his pipe wrench, and between the fatal bullet and the bullets found in his home. Additionally, Agent Randolph constructed psychological portraits of not only George Gwaltney, but Robin Bishop. It was important that the federal jury perceive her as a genuine victim. Robin Bishop was raped by someone she was taught to respect and trust, an officer of the law.
This made it very easy to understand the lack of force of violence that was evident in the crime scene other than the trauma. And she was compliant. She respected law enforcement authority. She's the type of person that pulled over and opened her wallet and handed her and stood out and was handcuffed even though she knew all she had done was a speeding ticket. It made her an easy victim.
In the same way, the FBI examined every aspect of Gwaltney's background to gain an understanding of his behavior around women. By questioning a woman who admitted to having an affair with Gwaltney, it was learned that she would meet him at his regular spot along the isolated highway for sex. The same exit to the access road where he had taken Robin Bishop. Every woman who received a summons from Gwaltney in the last 2 years was contacted, and a pattern emerged. Nearly a dozen women claimed that Gwaltney had solicited them for sex or touched them suggestively.
This indicated to us that this was not an isolated sexual assault with Mr. Gwaltney. This is a type of pattern of behavior. When he put his uniform on, he became predatory towards females, was our conclusion.
Witness testimony from the state trials was also carefully re-examined for discrepancies that could lead to breaks in the case. In some instances, the FBI leaned hard with the weight of federal authority.
Many witnesses were reluctant to testify, fearful. It's a small community, everybody knows everybody. We had to let them know that a federal investigation is just not a local matter that's going to blow away with the wind out in the desert. We're going to be here until this is resolved.
This persistence led to one of the most crucial breakthroughs in the case. San Bernardino Sheriff's detectives had originally interviewed the owners of Barstow gun shops for signs that Gwaltney might have tried to buy a replacement barrel for his service revolver the day after the crime. None claimed to have seen him. One of those interviewed was a Mr. William Addington, owner of the Powderhorn gun shop. He had denied during both state trial investigations that George Gwaltney had been in his shop the day after the murder. But printouts from the shop's phone bills caught Addington in a lie.
And we found toll records that show the day after the homicide, late in the afternoon, after the briefing that Gwaltney had attended, Mr. Addington had made a phone call up to this gun shop in Sacramento attempting to order a barrel for the type of weapon that Mr. Gwaltney carried that was now missing the barrel.
Now confronted by the FBI with this evidence, Addington admitted that Gwaltney had been in his store trying to buy a barrel for his revolver the day after Robin Bishop's murder. Addington had previously lied to state investigators in an effort to avoid getting involved. Fearing that lying to the FBI was a felony, Addington broke down. Reviewing the timeline of events, the FBI found that Gwaltney had created a false alibi to cover his visit to the gun shop and shoe repair shop where he'd had his holster cleaned and dyed, claiming to be on duty at the time. Gwaltney's story was falling apart. But the most important part of the timeline that the FBI reviewed was the pickup and delivery of the neighborhood boy Preston Olson.
The problem with that story was nobody had ever sat down with Preston Olson. He testified at 2 trials, and he verified what Gwaltney said.
But as the FBI went over the events with Preston and his mother, minute by minute, they realized that Officer Gwaltney had actually left the boy's house a half-hour earlier than his original testimony.
Preston never owned a watch and had never timed it, and nobody had ever done a timeline analysis with him.
This new information and the resulting revision of the timeline was one of the most important developments in the FBI's case.
We didn't stop for anything. There was no traffic whatsoever.
He can't change his story. He's locked himself in on 2 local trials to the local timeline. So the timeline was very significant. It gives him a half hour he has no explanation for.
With the revised timeline, Officer Gwaltney now had ample time, 20 to 40 minutes, to stop Bishop, handcuff her, force her to have sex with him, then shoot her.
Gwaltney knows she's got out-of-state plates. She's an attractive young blonde woman. He zips up the road, takes him a couple minutes, and then gives chase.
Finally, Dr. Edward Blake of Forensic Science Associates was contacted to re-examine the semen evidence from the first 2 trials. Prior to the use of DNA in criminal trials, the use of semen as evidence was problematic. But the FBI felt there might still be a way to use what they had. Gwaltney had had a vasectomy and had it reversed. Was there any way this information could be used in the identification and matching of his semen with the crime scene specimens? Federal prosecutors asked Dr. Blake, a forensic serologist, if there were any new scientific developments that might help the investigation.
He said, well, I mean, science does progress over time, does it not, Dr. Blake? I mean, maybe there's something, and would you be willing to just look into the matter? And I said, well, I happen to know some people that are involved in fertility work, and one of the elements that's involved in this case is the idea that Mr. Gwaltney had had a vasectomy and had it reversed.
Dr. Blake learned from colleagues at the University of California that a vasectomy reversal can sometimes cause the production of anti-sperm antibodies. The body reacts to sperm seeping into the bloodstream as if it were invading germs. The phenomenon is highly unusual and could conceivably be used as a marker in seminal fluid. He sent samples from Gwaltney to the University of California lab.
We found that not only do those fluids contain the anti-sperm antibodies, the antibodies were there at very, very high levels. And that provided the incentive to then explore the evidence itself.
Dr. Blake learned of a new test used in fertility studies. It was called the immunobead assay test and could determine the presence of anti-sperm antibodies in the crime scene samples. Because this kind of evidence had never been used in court before, Dr. Blake videotaped the test to show the jury in the federal trial.
Ultimately, extracts that were prepared from a pair of genes that were on Robin Bishop's body, samples that were taken from the Highway Patrol car seat were prepared, and these samples were tested for the presence of these anti-sperm antibodies. And in both of those samples, the anti-sperm antibodies were found.
During the 6-month FBI investigation, all of the re-examined evidence and all of the new witness testimony led to one bedrock certainty for the special agents working on the case.
We know we've got the right guy, and we're going to get him.
George Gwaltney was going back to court. George Michael Gwaltney was indicted by a federal grand jury for violating the civil rights of Robin Bishop and arrested. He was the first California law officer to be charged under the federal civil rights statute. Once again, he pleaded not guilty. But for the first time since the ordeal began, Robin Bishop's parents had hopes for a different outcome. This time, George Gwaltney faced a federal court and the FBI. It was clear from the beginning that the federal trial would not be a repeat of the first two trials. The federal trial began on January 17, 1984, in the U.S. District Court in Los Angeles. George Gwaltney was represented by public defender Carol Douglas, who chose not to have his client testify. He knew George Gwaltney was in serious trouble.
And then he subsequently murdered her.
Gwaltney knew that we were breaking his alibis, breaking his stories, and that he was going to have to concoct a new story. He had painted himself into a corner, and we were going to use his brush to paint him into a jail cell.
This is a frame-up.
As the trial progressed, the FBI punched a hole in every strong point of Gwaltney's earlier defense. The prosecution told the jury that Gwaltney had marked Robin Bishop as prey the first time he saw her in the fast food restaurant. With the testimony of the other women he had abused, Gwaltney's Officer of the Year image crumbled. After dropping Preston Olson at home, he pulled Bishop over and ordered her into his patrol car. The new testimony now gave him plenty of time. Following an established pattern, he drove to a familiar secluded spot and forced her into a sexual bargain, corroborated by the semen stain on the back seat of his new patrol car. As she sat struggling to put her boots back on, the blinding spotlight of Deputy Kaufman's patrol car hit Gwaltney, placing Gwaltney on the access road with Robin Bishop away from her car. Having no idea of who had seen him or what they had seen, he panicked and killed Robin Bishop. Then he breathlessly called the dispatcher with a possible suicide. The autopsy and the crime scene photos showed that he had not moved her head to check for a pulse. The movement was too great. He was desperately searching for the bullet that killed her, one in a series of actions in which he tried to cover up his crime. That night, Gwaltney roughly removed the barrel from the murder weapon, which left the microscopic tool-marked fingerprints that matched the gun frame with Gwaltney's tools. But perhaps most damning in the courtroom was the controversial immunobead assay test. Videotape of tested samples from Robin's jeans and the car seat show the tiny beads attaching themselves to the sperm.
What you can see in these videotapes for the appropriate specimens, that is, specimens that contain the anti-sperm antibody, is the final stage of the analysis.
Live sperm were shown swimming through the medium with the beads attached, indicating that the antibodies were present in both specimens. Dr. Blake was allowed by the judge only to indicate percentage results of his testing. He testified that Gwaltney's blood type put him in 12% of the population. Of that 12%, only 5% of those would test positive for the presence of anti-sperm antibodies. Less than 1% of the population could possibly have had sexual intercourse with Robin Bishop that night. As much as the defense might argue that the rest of the evidence was circumstantial, the scientific evidence was overpowering. The verdict was returned swiftly.
When the jury walked in, they would not look at Gwaltney, and it was very clear that they had a guilty verdict.
As far as I was concerned, I was pleased and that George had to suffer the consequences of his action, and that Robin Bishop's death didn't go uninvestigated.
It was, it's a case you'll never forget.
You took advantage of a vulnerable person.
The judge gave George Gwaltney the stiffest possible sentence, a maximum federal prison term of 90 years and a minimum term of 30 years before becoming eligible for parole.
Mr. Gwaltney,
You have
12 years
betrayed your
later,
badge.
George Gwaltney died in prison of a heart attack. To the end, he claimed he was innocent and had been the victim of a frame-up.